A chilling note slips under Miss Marple's door at dawn. The hill hides a secret. Shadows dance on Haverford Hill, whispering of murder. Who's watching from the mist? A cryptic medallion, a locked clock tower, a missing heir, each clue tightens. The noose. Can Miss Marple unravel the enigma before midnight chimes, or will the past claim another soul? Secrets fester in St. Mary Mead, and time is running out. Chapter 1. The hillside shadow, the autumn morning in St. Mary Mead, dawned with a crystalline clarity, the kind that made the world feel freshly minted. A delicate mist clung to the rolling hills beyond the village, softening their edges like a watercolor left to dry in the sun. Miss Jane Marple, bundled in her favorite tweed coat, and a prim woolen hat adorned with a single pearl brooch, stepped lightly along the footpath that wound toward the hillside known as Briar's Knoll. Her gloved hands clasped a worn walking stick. Though she used it more for rhythm than necessity, her steps brisk for a woman of her years. The air carried the sharp tang of fallen leaves and the distant sweetness of apples from orchards below, and Miss Marple inhaled deeply, her senses attuned to the quiet pulse of the village waking around her. She had taken to these morning walks, of late, not merely for exercise, though she admitted her knees appreciated the effort, but for the solitude they afforded. St. Mary Mead, for all its charm, was a cauldron of gossip, and Miss Marple found the hillside a rare sanctuary where she could think without interruption. Her mind, as ever, was a finely tuned instrument, sifting through the village's daily dramas like a jeweler sorting gems. Today, however, her thoughts were lighter, dwelling on the vicar's recent sermon about patience and the curious case of Mrs. Price's missing tabby, which Miss Marple suspected had simply wandered to the bakery for scraps. The path steepened. As it approached Briar's Knoll, a gentle rise crowned by an ancient oak, whose gnarled branches spread like a cathedral vault. The hill was named for an old legend about a briar thicket that once ensnared a wayward knight, though now it was merely a grassy slope dotted with wildflowers and the occasional rabbit. Miss Marple paused to catch her breath, her gaze sweeping the landscape. The village lay below, a patchwork of thatched roofs and chimneys trailing wisps of smoke. The church spire pierced the mist, and the market square, just stirring, promised its usual bustle of farmers and housewives haggling over turnips and tweed dot. It was then, as she turned to resume her climb, that something caught her eye, a subtle discord in the hillside's harmony. Near the oak, where the grass should have lain smooth, the earth was churned, as if a hasty spade had bitten into it. Miss Marple's lips pursed, her curiosity piqued. She approached cautiously, her stick tapping the ground, and knelt with surprising agility to inspect the disturbance. The soil was loose, freshly turned, and bore the faint imprint of a boot, not the heavy tread of a farmer, but something finer, perhaps a gentleman's shoe. Beside the patch, half hidden by a tuft of grass, lay a silk scarf, its vibrant emerald hue startling against the muted greens. She lifted it gingerly, noting its fine weave and a faint scent of lavender, a fragrance too refined for a laborer's. Wife. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her mind already threading possibilities. A scarf lost in a lover's tryst? Unlikely the hillside was too exposed for such indiscretions. A gardener's oversight? No, the village employed no one for this. Untamed knoll. Her fingers brushed the earth again, and a glint of metal winked back. She dug gently with her glove, unearthing a small silver cigarette case, its surface etched with the initials H.G. The case was tarnished but intact, its clasp stiff with disuse. She opened it to find a single cigarette, its paper yellowed, and a folded scrap of paper tucked inside. Unfurling it, she read a hasty scrawl. "Meet me at the Oak, dusk, urgent." No signature, no date, but the ink was fresh enough to smudge under her thumb. A shiver ran through her, not from the chill, but from the sudden weight of suspicion. This was no mere litter. The churned earth, the scarf, the cigarette case, they whispered of something clandestine, perhaps sinister. Miss Marple stood, slipping the case and scarf into her coat pocket, her expression calm, but her mind racing. She scanned the hillside, but no one stirred. Only a blackbird's call broke the silence. Her gaze lingered on the village below, where the market was now alive with color and noise. Someone, she thought, knew what had happened here, and she intended to find out who dot. By the time Miss Marple descended to the market square, the village was in full swing. Stalls brimmed with autumn's bounty, crisp apples, golden squashes, and jars of amber honey, while vendors called out their wares with practiced cheer. Housewives in cloche hats bartered briskly, and children darted between carts, chasing a stray dog with a pilfered sausage. Miss Marple blended effortlessly into the crowd, her unassuming figure drawing little notice, though her sharp blue eyes missed nothing. She paused at Mrs. Weatherby's flower stall, admiring a bouquet of chrysanthemums while listening to the chatter around her. "Morning, Miss Marple," Mrs. Weatherby said, her round face flushed from the cold. "Fine day for a walk, ain't it? Though I heard you was up on Briar's Knoll bit wild up there, no?" Miss Marple smiled, her tone mild. "Oh, it's quite peaceful, Mrs. Weatherby. The view is lovely this time of year. Have you been up lately?" Mrs. Weatherby shook her head, arranging daisies. "Not me, miss. Too steep for my legs. But young Tom Briar was up there often, working for Sir Henry. Haven't seen him in days, though. Odd that." Miss Marple's interest sharpened, though. Her face remained placid. "Tom Briar, the estate worker? I thought he was Sir Henry's groundsman." "Aye, that's him," Mrs. Weatherby said, lowering her voice. "Strong lad, but a bit too fond of the pub. Some say he had words with Sir Henry last week, shouting they heard over at Grayson Manor. Now he's gone, and folk are talking." "Talking?" Miss Marple prompted, selecting a chrysanthemum. Mrs. Weatherby leaned closer, her eyes gleaming with gossip. "They say Tom up and left, maybe for London. But his sister Mary swears he'd never go without telling her. And there's that stranger seen near the hillside, tall chap, city clothes. Gives me the shivers." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, paying for the flower. "Most curious. I'm sure Tom will turn up. Young men are often restless." As she moved away, her mind churned. Tom Briar's disappearance, his argument with Sir Henry Grayson, and the stranger's presence were threads in a tapestry she couldn't yet see. The cigarette case with its H.G. initials pointed unmistakably to Sir Henry, the village's wealthiest landowner, whose manor crowned the eastern hills. The scarf, too, suggested a woman's involvement, perhaps. Lady Eleanor, Sir Henry's wife, known for her elegance, but rarely seen in the village. Miss Marple's fingers brushed the case in her pocket, its cool metal grounding her thoughts. She needed more information, and the market was a gold mine of loose tongues. She drifted to the baker's stall, where Mr. Jenkins, a stout man with flour-dusted hands, was arguing with a customer over a burnt loaf. Nearby, two women, Mrs. Price and Miss Hartnell, huddled in conversation, their voices low but audible to Miss Marple's practiced ear. "It's not right," Mrs. Price was saying, clutching her basket. "Tom was a good boy, always helped. With my groceries. Mary says his room's untouched, clothes, boots, all there. He didn't leave." Miss Hartnell, a spinster with a penchant for dramatics, gasped. "You think something's happened to him? On that hillside, maybe? I heard Sir Henry was furious, something about land papers Tom misplaced." Mrs. Price shook her head. "More than papers, I reckon. That stranger's been sniffing around, asking about the knoll. City folk don't come here for nothing." Miss Marple filed away their words, her expression serene as she bought a scone from Mr. Jenkins. Tom's room untouched. Sir Henry's anger, the stranger's interest, it all circled back to Briar's Knoll. She glanced toward the hillside, its oak a dark silhouette against the clearing mist. The churned earth troubled her most. It suggested haste, perhaps concealment. Had Tom stumbled on something he shouldn't have? And what of the cigarette case's note? "Meet me at the oak dusk." Urgent? It was too precise for a coincidence. Miss Marple's next stop was the post office, a cramped building smelling of ink and sealing wax. Miss Clara Finch, the postmistress, was a fount of village secrets, her sharp memory rivaling Miss Marple's own. As Miss Marple purchased stamps, she steered the conversation deftly. "Good morning, Clara," she said, her voice warm. "I hear there's been some excitement about young Tom Briar. Have you seen him lately?" Miss Finch's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles. "Not since last Tuesday, Miss Marple. He posted a letter, thick one, to London, I think. Seemed in a hurry, kept looking over his shoulder. I told him to slow down, but he just laughed, said he had business to settle." "Business?" Miss Marple tilted her head. "For Sir Henry, perhaps?" Miss Finch snorted. "Doubt it. Sir Henry's been in a right state, storming in here yesterday, demanding if I'd seen any letters from Tom. I hadn't, but he left. In a huff. And that wife of his, Lady Eleanor, she sent a telegram to Bath last week, all secretive. Something's brewing, mark my words." Miss Marple thanked her, her mind alight. Tom's letter to London, Sir Henry's agitation, Lady Eleanor's. Telegram, it painted a picture of discord at Grayson Manor. The cigarette case with its H.G. initials seemed less a coincidence now. Had Sir Henry met Tom on the hillside, perhaps under duress? And the scarf's lavender scent, could it belong to Lady Eleanor, or another woman entirely? As she left the post office, Miss Marple noticed a figure across the square. Sir Henry Grayson himself, tall and imposing in a tailored overcoat, his gray hair swept back. He stood by a fruit stall, but his eyes darted nervously, and his hand clutched a crumpled letter. Miss Marple watched, unnoticed, as he scanned the crowd, his expression tightening when a young woman, Mary Briar, Tom's sister, passed by, her face pale and drawn. Sir Henry turned abruptly, striding toward his motor car, parked near the church. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Sir Henry's unease was palpable, and Mary's distress suggested she knew more than she'd told. Miss Marple resolved to speak with Mary, but first she needed to understand the hillside secrets. The churned earth hinted at something buried evidence, perhaps, or worse. She glanced at the oak's distant silhouette, its branches swaying in the breeze. The note's urgency, "Meet me at the oak, dusk," suggested a rendezvous gone awry. Had Tom met someone there, only to vanish? By midday, the market's bustle had softened, and Miss Marple found Mary Briar at the edge of the square, sitting on a bench with a basket of mending. Mary, a slight woman with Tom's dark eyes, looked weary, her fingers trembling as she threaded a needle. Miss Marple approached, her smile gentle. "Good day, Mary," she said, settling beside her. "I've been hearing about your brother. I do hope he's well." Mary's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "I don't know, Miss Marple. Tom's not the sort to run off. He was worried. Last I saw him said he'd found something he shouldn't have up on Briar's Knoll. Wouldn't tell me what, just said he'd fix it." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her voice remained steady. "Something on the knoll? That's curious. Did he mention Sir Henry?" Mary hesitated, glancing around. "He said Sir Henry was cross about some papers, land papers, I think. Tom worked on the estate, you know, tending the grounds. But he was scared, Miss Marple. I've never seen him like that." Miss Marple patted her hand. "You've been very brave, Mary. If Tom left any notes or belongings, might I see them? It could help." Mary nodded slowly. "He left a jacket at home. There's a notebook in the pocket scribbles, mostly. You're welcome to look." Miss Marple thanked her, promising to visit soon. As Mary returned to her mending, Miss Marple's mind raced. Tom's fear, the land papers, the hillside disturbance, it all pointed to a secret worth hiding. The cigarette case's initials, H.G., loomed larger, tying Sir Henry to the scene. But the scarf's lavender scent puzzled her. It suggested a woman's presence, perhaps someone unexpected. And the stranger Mrs. Weatherby mentioned, could he be the note's author, or another player entirely? Miss Marple returned to her cottage for lunch, a modest meal of soup and bread, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She spread the scarf and cigarette case on her table, studying them under a magnifying glass. The scarf's weave was exquisite, likely imported, and the lavender scent clung stubbornly, suggesting recent use. The cigarette case's tarnish indicated age, but the note's fresh ink was telling. She reread it. "Meet me at the oak, dusk," urgent, and frowned. The handwriting was bold, almost reckless, unlike Sir Henry's meticulous nature. Could it belong to the stranger, or even Tom himself? As she sipped her tea, Miss Marple considered her next move. Visiting Grayson Manor was essential. Sir Henry's behavior demanded scrutiny, and Lady Eleanor's telegram to Bath raised questions. But the hillside itself called to her. The churned earth suggested something buried, perhaps papers, money, or something graver. She shuddered at the thought of Tom lying beneath that soil, though she pushed it aside. Speculation without evidence was folly, and Miss Marple prided herself on facts. She donned her coat again, tucking the scarf and case into a drawer. The afternoon was waning, the light turning golden, and she decided to revisit Briar's Knoll. The market had quieted, and the path to the hillside was empty save for a pair of rabbits darting into the grass. As she climbed, the oak loomed larger, its branches casting long shadows. The churned earth was unchanged, but Miss Marple noticed something new. A faint trail of bent grass leading toward a thicket at the hill's base. She followed it, her stick probing the ground, and found a small clearing hidden by briars. There, Half buried in leaves lay a leather glove, its fine stitching matching the scarf's elegance. Miss Marple's breath caught. The glove, like the scarf, was no villager's possession. She lifted it carefully, noting a faint stained mud or something darker. Her mind flashed to Lady Eleanor, whose refined tastes were the talk of St. Mary Mead. But why would she venture here, and with whom? The cigarette case's H.G. initials suggested Sir Henry, but the glove and scarf pointed elsewhere. Miss Marple slipped the glove into her pocket, her resolve hardening. The hillside held secrets, and she would unravel them. That evening, as Miss Marple sat by her fire knitting a scarf for the vicar's charity drive, her thoughts circled the day's discoveries. The cigarette case, scarf, glove, and note formed a puzzle, each piece hinting at a larger picture. Tom Briar's disappearance, his argument with Sir Henry, and the stranger's presence were no coincidence. The churned earth suggested concealment, perhaps of evidence or a body. She dismissed the latter for now. Tom might yet be alive, hiding or fled. But the land papers Mary mentioned intrigued her. Could Tom have uncovered a fraud, threatening Sir Henry's wealth? Miss Marple's needles clicked rhythmically, her mind as sharp as ever. She would visit Mary tomorrow for Tom's notebook, then Grayson Manor to observe Sir Henry and Lady Eleanor. The stranger, too, warranted investigation. The innkeeper might. No more. For now she pocketed the cigarette case and scarf, locking them in her writing desk. The Hillside Enigma had taken root, and Miss Marple, with her acute logic, was determined to see it through. As the fire crackled, she smiled faintly. St. Mary Mead, so deceptively tranquil, always had its shadows, and she, Jane Marple, was adept at bringing them to light. Chapter 2. The village stir the morning after her discovery on Briar's Knoll. Miss Jane Marple awoke with the clarity of purpose that often followed a restless night of knitting and thinking. Her cottage, a cozy haven of chintz curtains and polished oak, was bathed in the soft glow of dawn, filtering through lace. She brewed a pot of Darjeeling, its aroma mingling with the faint lavender scent of the silk scarf she'd left on her writing desk. The scarf, the tarnished cigarette case with its H.G. initials, the leather glove, and the cryptic note, "Meet me at the oak, dusk," urgent, lay like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, each begging to be fitted into a larger picture. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her blue eyes sharp despite the early hour, and resolved to weave those pieces into something tangible today. St. Mary Mead was a village where secrets, like morning mist, lingered just long enough to be noticed by those who knew where to look. The market square, with its bustling stalls and wagging tongues, was the perfect place to start. Miss Marple dressed carefully, choosing a navy wool coat and a hat with a modest velvet ribbon, her appearance calculated to blend into the crowd. She tucked the cigarette case into her handbag, leaving the scarf and glove locked in her desk. They were too delicate to risk losing, and their significance, particularly the lavender scent, required further thought. Her walking stick in hand, she stepped into the crisp autumn air, the path to the village humming with the promise of revelations. The market square was a riot of color and sound. By 9 o'clock, farmers unloaded crates of russet apples and golden pumpkins, while housewives in tweed skirts and cloche hats haggled over prices with a vigor that bordered on sport. A fiddler played a jaunty tune near the church steps, drawing a gaggle of children who clapped and spun in delight. Miss Marple moved through the crowd with the ease of a shadow, her unassuming figure drawing scant attention. Though her senses were as alert as a fox's, she paused at Mr. Harrow's cheese stall, admiring a wheel of cheddar while her ears tuned to the gossip swirling around her. "Morning, Miss Marple," Mr. Harrow said, slicing a sample with a flourish. "Fine day, ain't it? Though the village is all aflutter about young Tom Briar." Miss Marple accepted the cheese, her smile gentle. "So I've heard, Mr. Harrow. It's unlike Tom to vanish without a word. Have you any thoughts on the matter?" Mr. Harrow leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Well, miss, I saw Tom last Monday, buying a wedge of my best Stilton. He was jumpy, kept glancing at the road like he expected trouble. Said he'd been working up on Briar's Knoll something about Sir Henry's land. Next day, poof gone." Miss Marple's interest quickened, though her expression remained placid. "Sir Henry's land? That's curious. I thought Tom was merely a groundsman." "Aye, but he was poking into things, if you ask me," Mr. Harrow said, wiping his knife. "I heard him and Sir Henry arguing outside the pub shouting about papers or some such. And there's that stranger about tall fellow in a city coat. Seen him near the knoll at dusk." Miss Marple thanked him, filing away his words. Tom's nervousness, the argument with Sir Henry, and the stranger's presence echoed Mrs. Weatherby's gossip from the previous day, but Mr. Harrow's mention of papers aligned with Mary Briar's account. The cigarette cases H.G. Initials loomed larger, tying Sir Henry Grayson to the hillside disturbance. She glanced across the square where the Grayson motor car, a sleek black Bentley, was parked near the post office. Sir Henry himself stood by it, his tall frame rigid, a letter clutched in his gloved hand. His gray eyes scanned the crowd, narrowing. As they passed over a knot of villagers whispering near the baker's stall, Miss Marple moved toward the baker's, her steps deliberate. Mrs. Price and Miss Hartnell, whom she'd overheard yesterday, were there again, their conversation as animated as ever. She lingered by a tray of scones, her ears attuned to their words. "It's a scandal, that's what," Miss Hartnell declared, her voice carrying over the hum of the market. "Tom Briar wouldn't leave Mary in the lurch. I say he's met with foul play, and Sir Henry knows more than he's letting on." Mrs. Price clutched her basket, her face pale. "You think so?" Mary's beside herself. She found Tom's notebook, full of numbers and such land measurements, she thinks. He was up to something with that hillside. Miss Marple's heart skipped, but she kept her gaze on the scones, selecting one with care. Tom's notebook, mentioned by Mary yesterday, now held new weight. Land measurements suggested a deeper motive, perhaps a dispute over Briar's Knoll itself. She paid for the scone and turned, catching Sir Henry's eye, across the square. His expression flickered surprise, perhaps, or unease, before he turned abruptly, climbing into his car. The Bentley roared to life and sped toward Grayson Manor, leaving a trail of dust that mingled with the morning mist. Miss Marple's next destination was Mary Briar's cottage, a modest stone dwelling on the village's edge, its garden bursting with late-blooming asters. Mary was outside, hanging laundry, her movements slow with worry. Miss Marple approached, her smile warm, and offered the scone as a gesture of kindness. "Good morning, Mary," she said, settling on a garden bench. "I thought you might like a little treat." "How are you holding up?" Mary's eyes welled, but she managed a nod. "Kind of you, Miss Marple. I'm trying, but it's hard not knowing where Tom is. I keep thinking he'll walk through the gate, laughing like he used to." Miss Marple patted her hand. "I'm sure we'll find answers. You mentioned Tom's notebook yesterday. Might I see it? It could shed light on his plans." Mary hesitated, then disappeared into the cottage, returning with a worn leather notebook, its pages dog-eared. "It's mostly scribbles," she said, handing it over. "Numbers, sketches of the knoll, some talk of boundaries. I don't understand it, but Tom was keen on it." Miss Marple opened the notebook, her fingers tracing Tom's untidy scrawl. Pages of measurements, distances, angles. Coordinates were interspersed with sketches of Briar's Knoll, the ancient oak marked with a cross. One entry caught her eye. "H.G. claims North Ridge. False. Check deed." Another read. "Stranger asked about ruins. Offered £50 for map." Her lips pursed. The H.G. matched the cigarette case and the stranger's interest in the Knowles ruins, a crumbling stone circle near the oak suggested a motive beyond mere curiosity. She closed the notebook, her mind alight with possibilities. "Thank you, Mary," she said, returning it. "This is most helpful. Did Tom ever mention a silk scarf, perhaps one with a lavender scent?" Mary frowned, shaking her head. "No, miss. Tom wasn't one for fancy things. But Lady Eleanor wears lavender perfume, smells it all over the manor, they say." Miss Marple's pulse quickened, though her face remained serene. Lady Eleanor's lavender linked her to the scarf, and perhaps the glove, deepening the mystery. She thanked Mary, promising to keep her informed, and left the cottage, her thoughts churning. The notebook's entries pointed to a land dispute, with Sir Henry claiming part of the knoll falsely. Tom's discovery of a deed discrepancy could have threatened Sir Henry's plans, explaining their argument. But the stranger's offer of £50 for a map hinted at a separate agenda, perhaps tied to the village legend of treasure buried in the ruins. Midday found Miss Marple at the Blue Boar, the village pub, a timber-board building redolent of ale and polished brass. She rarely frequented it, but its lunchtime crowd offered a chance to probe further. The landlord, Mr. Dobbs, greeted her with surprise, offering a corner table and a glass of elderflower cordial. Miss Marple accepted, her eyes scanning the room. Farmers and shopkeepers filled the benches, their voices a low hum, but her attention fixed on a trio of estate workers in the far corner, their heads bent in hushed conversation. She sipped her cordial, her ears attuned. One worker, a ruddy-faced man named Jim Carter, was speaking, his voice carrying just enough to reach her. Tom was on to something. "I tell you," Jim said, nursing a pint. "He showed me a map once, said the Knowles North Ridge wasn't Sir Henry's at all. Old deed in the manor proves it," he said. Another worker, Bill Stokes, snorted. "And look where it got him gone, or worse." That stranger was asking about Tom, too. City type, fancy coat. Offered me a quid to keep quiet. Miss Marple's fingers tightened around her glass, but her expression remained placid. The stranger's interference was no coincidence, and Jem's mention of a deed echoed Tom's notebook. She glanced at the bar, where Mr. Dobbs was polishing glasses, his eyes flicking toward the workers. Miss Marple rose, approaching him with a smile. "Mr. Dobbs," she said, her tone light, "I hear there's been talk of a stranger in the village. Have you seen him?" Mr. Dobbs hesitated, then leaned closer. "Aye, miss. Tall chap, calls himself Robert Carver. Stayed here 2 nights, asked about Briar's Knoll ruins, mostly. Paid well, but kept to himself. Left yesterday, but I reckon he's still about." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Robert Carver likely, the R.C. of Tom's dealings, had a clear interest in the Knoll. His departure was suspicious, perhaps a ruse to avoid scrutiny. She thanked Mr. Dobbs and returned to her table, her thoughts interrupted by a commotion at the door. Sir Henry Grayson entered, his overcoat flapping, his face flushed with agitation. The pub quieted, eyes turning to him as he strode to the bar, demanding a whiskey dot. Miss Marple watched, unnoticed, as Sir Henry downed the drink, his hand trembling. His eyes darted to Jem Carter's table, narrowing with a flash of anger or fear. He muttered something to Mr. Dobbs, then left as abruptly as he'd come, the door slamming behind him. The pub erupted in whispers, and Miss Marple caught fragments. Sir Henry's in a state, Tom's trouble. Land deal gone sour. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited the village library, a quaint building stuffed with musty tomes and overseen by Miss Lavender, a bespectacled woman with a passion for local history. Miss Marple sought records on Briar's Knoll, hoping to clarify the land dispute. As Miss Lavender fetched a ledger, Miss Marple browsed a shelf of village chronicles, her fingers pausing on a slim volume about local legends. A passage on the Knoll's ruins caught her eye. The stone circle, erected in antiquity, is said to guard a Saxon horde, buried to evade invaders. Many have sought it, none prevailed. Miss Lavender returned with the ledger, her voice eager. "Here's the land record, Miss Marple. Briar's Knoll is crown land, but the Grayson family claimed grazing rights in 1850. No mention of the North Ridge, though." Miss Marple scanned the pages, noting the absence of any deed granting Sir Henry the Ridge. Tom's notebook was correct, the claim was false. She thanked Miss Lavender, her mind buzzing. The legend of a Saxon horde, though fanciful, might explain Carver's interest. Had Tom stumbled on evidence of treasure, or merely the deed discrepancy? And why was Sir Henry so rattled? As evening fell, Miss Marple walked to Grayson Manor, invited for tea by Lady Eleanor, whom she'd met at a church bazaar. The manor, a sprawling stone edifice, loomed against the darkening hills, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. Miss Marple was ushered into a drawing-room of velvet drapes and polished mahogany, where Lady Eleanor, pale and elegant in a lavender gown, greeted her with forced warmth. "Miss Marple, how kind of you to come," Lady Eleanor said, pouring tea with a trembling hand. "The village is so unsettled lately." Miss Marple smiled, noting a faint bruise on Lady Eleanor's wrist, half hidden by a lace cuff. "Indeed, Lady Eleanor, Tom Briar's absence has everyone talking. I hear he worked closely with Sir Henry." Lady Eleanor's cup rattled against its saucer, her eyes flicking to the door. "Oh, yes, Tom was reliable. Sir Henry's quite upset about his leaving. Land matters, you know, dreadfully tedious." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her gaze steady. "I found a silk scarf on Briar's Knoll yesterday, quite fine, with a lavender scent. Might it be yours?" Lady Eleanor's face drained of color, her fingers tightening. "A scarf? No, I rarely walk there. Perhaps a villager's." Miss Marple nodded, letting the silence stretch. Sir Henry entered then, his expression strained. a letter crumpled in his hand. He greeted Miss Marple curtly, his eyes avoiding hers, and excused himself, claiming business. Lady Eleanor's relief was palpable, but Miss Marple's suspicions deepened. The lavender scent, the bruise, Sir Henry's letter, it all pointed to a household under strain. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by her fire, knitting furiously as her mind pieced together the day's findings. Tom's notebook confirmed a false land claim, tying Sir Henry to the hillside. Carver's interest in the ruins suggested a treasure hunt, perhaps linked to Tom's disappearance. Lady Eleanor's reaction to the scarf and her bruise hinted at personal secrets. The cigarette case's H.G. initials were damning, but the note's handwriting puzzled her too bold for Sir Henry's meticulous hand. She resolved to visit Grayson Manor again, probing Sir Henry's involvement without raising his guard. The Manor's secrets land papers, Lady Eleanor's fear, the letter Sir Henry clutched held the key. For now she locked Tom's notebook with her other clues, her resolve firm. The village stir had given her threads to follow, and Miss Marple, with her acute logic, was ready to weave them into truth. Chapter 3. The Manor's Facade. The late morning sun cast a golden sheen over St. Mary Mead, its warmth doing little to dispel the chill that lingered in Miss Jane Marple's thoughts. Her visit to the village the previous day had woven a delicate web of suspicion around Briar's Knoll, with threads leading to Sir Henry Grayson's troubled estate and the enigmatic Robert Carver. The silk scarf, fragrant with lavender, the tarnished cigarette case etched with H.G., the leather glove, and Tom Briar's notebook brimming with sketches and cryptic notes about a false land claim sat locked in her cottage desk, each a silent witness to a mystery she was determined to unravel. Today, Miss Marple's destination was Grayson Manor, where an invitation for tea with Lady Eleanor offered a chance to probe the heart of the enigma. Miss Marple, dressed with care, selecting a dove-gray coat and a hat adorned with a single feather, her appearance crafted to project harmless gentility. Her handbag held only a handkerchief and a small notebook, the cigarette case left behind to avoid questions. The manor, a grand edifice of honeyed stone perched on the eastern hills, was a half-hour's walk from the village, its chimneys visible above the autumn foliage. As she followed the winding lane lined with hedgerows heavy with blackberries, her mind sifted through yesterday's discoveries, Tom's fear of something he'd found on the knoll, Sir Henry's agitation in the market, Lady Eleanor's nervous denial of the scarf, and the stranger Carver's interest in the ruins. The notebook's entry, H.G. claims Northridge. False. Check deed. Pointed to a land dispute, but the lavender scent and the glove suggested a personal dimension, perhaps within the Grayson household itself. The manor's iron gates loomed ahead, flanked by stone lions weathered by time. Miss Marple rang the bell, and a young maid, Elsie, ushered her through a gravel drive lined with manicured yews. The manor's facade was imposing, its tall windows reflecting the sky, but Miss Marple noted signs of neglect, peeling paint on the shutters, a cracked urn by the entrance. These were small cracks in the Graysons' polished veneer, hinting at troubles within. Elsie led her to a drawing-room where Lady Eleanor awaited, her lavender gown a soft echo of the scarf's scent. The room was a study in opulent velvet drapes, a gleaming chandelier, a roaring fire, and a marble hearth, but the air was thick with tension as if the walls themselves held their breath. "Miss Marple, how delightful," Lady Eleanor said, rising with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her face was pale, her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon, but a faint bruise on her wrist, half hidden by a lace cuff, caught Miss Marple's attention. "Do sit. Tea will be just a moment." Miss Marple settled into a plush armchair, her gaze warm but observant. "Thank you, Lady Eleanor. The manor is as charming as ever, though I dare say it's a busy time with Sir Henry's land affairs." Lady Eleanor's cup rattled slightly as she poured tea, her fingers trembling. "Oh, Henry's always busy with the estate. Tedious business, really. Sugar?" "None, thank you," Miss Marple said, noting the evasion. "I hear young Tom Briar worked on the grounds. Such a pity about his disappearance. He was quite reliable, wasn't he?" Lady Eleanor's smile faltered, her eyes flicking to the door. "Yes, Tom was helpful. Henry relied on him for the Knowles upkeep. I'm sure he's just off on some lark young men, you know." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her tone light. "Of course, though the village is quite concerned. I found a curious item on Briar's knoll, a silk scarf, lavender-scented. It seemed out of place for a groundsman's haunt." The cup in Lady Eleanor's hand trembled visibly, tea sloshing onto the saucer. "A scarf? How odd. I've not been to the knoll in ages. Perhaps a villager dropped it." Miss Marple nodded, letting the silence stretch, her eyes catching a flicker of movement beyond the door. Sir Henry Grayson entered, his tall frame filling the doorway, his gray hair swept back, his eyes shadowed with strain. He wore a tailored suit, but his tie was askew, and a crumpled letter peeked from his pocket, much like the one Miss Marple had seen in the market. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice clipped but polite. "An unexpected pleasure. Eleanor, I'll be in the study urgent." "Business." Miss Marple smiled, her voice soft. "Good day, Sir Henry. I was just mentioning Tom Briar's absence. The village misses him, especially on the knoll. He seemed quite involved with your land matters." Sir Henry's jaw tightened, his hand brushing the letter in his pocket. "Tom was a worker, nothing more. Probably ran off to London. Excuse me." He strode out, leaving a chill in his wake. Lady Eleanor's shoulders sagged, her composure fraying. Miss Marple's mind raced. Sir Henry's abruptness, the letter, and Lady Eleanor's bruise suggested a household under siege. The lavender scent tied Lady Eleanor to the knoll, but her denial was too quick, too practiced. Was she hiding something, or protecting someone? As tea continued, Miss Marple steered the conversation to village matters, her questions gentle but probing. Lady Eleanor spoke of charity bazaars and garden parties, but her eyes darted to the door, as if expecting Sir Henry's return. Miss Marple noticed a locked door across the hall, its heavy oak frame out of place among the drawing-room's elegance. A study, perhaps, or something more private. She recalled Tom's notebook mentioning land papers and Sir Henry's. Argument in her curiosity sharpened. "Such a lovely room," Miss Marple said, rising to admire a portrait of Sir Henry's late mother, her stern face framed in gold. "Does Sir Henry keep his papers here, or in a study? Land matters must be quite demanding." Lady Eleanor hesitated, her fingers twisting a napkin. "The study, mostly. Henry's very particular about it, keeps it locked. Too many papers, he says." Miss Marple nodded, her smile disarming. "Wise, I'm sure. Papers can be so revealing. She paused, noting Elsie lingering in the hall, polishing a vase with undue focus. The maid's eyes met Miss Marple's briefly, then dropped, a flush creeping up her cheeks. Miss Marple filed this away. Elsie knew something, perhaps about the study or the Knoll dot. As Lady Eleanor excused herself to check on the kitchen, Miss Marple seized the moment. She drifted toward the locked door, her steps silent on the thick carpet. The keyhole was polished, recently used, and a faint scratch on the lock suggested force, an attempt to open it, perhaps. She heard footsteps and returned to her seat, her heart steady despite the thrill of discovery. Elsie re-entered, carrying a tray of biscuits, and Miss Marple caught her eye again. "Elsie, dear," she said, her voice warm, "you must be so busy here. Do you ever walk on Briar's Knoll? It's lovely this time of year." Elsie's hands fumbled the tray, a biscuit tumbling to the floor. "No, miss, never. Too far, and, well, it's spooky up there. Tom used to go, though, for Sir Henry. Said he saw things strangers late at night." Miss Marple's pulse quickened, but she smiled. "Strangers, how curious." "Thank you, Elsie." Lady Eleanor returned, and the conversation resumed, but Miss Marple's thoughts were elsewhere. Elsie's mention of strangers on the Knoll echoed village gossip about Robert Carver, and the locked study suggested hidden documents, perhaps the deed Tom had questioned. As she finished her tea, Miss Marple noticed a small key on a side table, half hidden by a lace doily. It was ornate, unlike a household key, and its presence seemed careless for a man as guarded as Sir Henry. She memorized its shape, suspecting. It unlocked the study. Leaving the manor, Miss Marple walked slowly, her mind piecing together the morning's observations. Lady Eleanor's bruise and nervous denial of the scarf suggested fear, perhaps of Sir Henry. The locked study, with its scratched lock, hinted at secrets, land papers, or something more damning. Elsie's slip about strangers on the Knoll confirmed. Carver's involvement and the key on the table was a tantalizing lead. Miss Marple's fingers brushed her handbag, where she'd slipped a folded napkin from the manor, its edge stained with a faint lavender trace, another link to the scarf. Paused at the manor's gates, glancing back at the looming facade. Sir Henry's agitation, seen in the market and now here, pointed to a man under pressure. Tom Briar's disappearance, tied to a false land claim, suggested a motive for silencing him. But the lavender-scented scarf and glove, and Lady Eleanor's reaction, hinted at a personal thread, perhaps a betrayal within the manor. Miss Marple's lips pursed, her resolve firm. She would return to the manor, armed with Elsie's trust in the key's location, to uncover what lay behind that locked door dot. As she descended the lane, the village spread below, its thatched roofs glowing in the fading light. St. Mary Mead's tranquillity was a facade, much like the manor's, and Miss Marple, with her acute logic, was determined to pierce it. Chapter 4. A hidden ledger. The evening air in St. Mary Mead carried a crisp bite, the kind that sharpened the senses and quickened the pulse. Miss Jane Marple, seated by her cottage fire, knitted with a rhythm that belied the whirlwind of her thoughts. The clues from Briar's Knoll, the lavender-scented silk scarf, the tarnished cigarette case with its H.G. initials, the fine leather glove, and the urgent note sat, locked in her desk, joined now by a folded napkin from Grayson Manor, its edge faintly stained with lavender. Her visit to the manor earlier that day had painted a vivid picture. Lady Eleanor's nervous denial, the bruise on her wrist, Sir Henry's curt agitation, and the locked study door with its telltale scratch. Most tantalizing was the ornate key she'd spotted on a side table, likely the gate to the manor's secrets. Tonight Miss Marple resolved to unlock that door, quite literally, and uncover what Sir Henry was so keen to hide. She dressed for the occasion with care, choosing a dark wool coat and a plain hat to blend into the night. Her handbag held a small torch, a pair of gloves, and a hairpin tools of discretion she'd learned never to underestimate. The manor was a mile's walk, and the moon, a slender crescent, offered scant light, perfect for her purpose. As she stepped into the chill, the village lay quiet, its thatched roofs silvered by starlight, the distant bark of a dog the only sound. Miss Marple's heart beat steadily, not with fear, but with the thrill of pursuit. She was no stranger to the impropriety of sneaking about, though she preferred to call it expedient inquiry. The study's locked door, Elsie's nervous hint about strangers on the knoll, and Tom Briar's notebook scribbled with notes of a false land claim demanded answers, and she intended to find them. The lane to Grayson Manor wound through. Hedgerows thick with autumn's decay, their rustle masking her footsteps. The manor's silhouette loomed against the hills, its windows dark save for a faint glow in an upper room. Miss Marple approached the side gate, less guarded than the main entrance, and found it unlatched a stroke of luck, or perhaps carelessness. She slipped through, her torch casting a narrow beam on the gravel path. The manor's gardens were a maze of yews and rose bushes, their shadows dancing in the breeze. She paused at the servants' entrance, recalling Elsie's flustered demeanor. The maid, she suspected, knew more than she'd let on, and her trust might yet prove vital. The door was locked, but the hairpin proved its worth, coaxing the mechanism with a soft click. Miss Marple stepped into a dim corridor, the air heavy with polish and old wood. Her torch swept the walls, revealing portraits of stern Grayson ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow her. She moved silently, her years of navigating St. Mary Mead's creaky floors serving her well. The drawing-room where she'd taken tea with Lady Eleanor was just ahead, and beyond it, the locked study door. Her pulse quickened as she reached the hall, the chandelier's crystals glinting faintly in her torchlight. The side table stood as she'd left it, the ornate key still nestled under the lace doily, its presence a silent invitation. Miss Marple lifted the key, its weight cool in her gloved hand, and approached the study door. The scratch on the lock was more pronounced in the torch's beam, suggesting someone, perhaps Tom, had tried to force it. She inserted the key, her breath steady, despite the faint creak of the turning lock. The door opened into a room of dark oak panels and leather-bound books, a massive desk dominating the center. A single lamp burned low, casting shadows on a Persian rug. Miss Marple closed the door behind her, her senses alert for any sound. The manor was silent, but she knew Sir Henry or Lady Eleanor could appear at any moment. She began her search at the desk, its surface cluttered with papers, an inkstand and a half-empty whiskey decanter. A drawer yielded bills and receipts, but nothing incriminating. Her fingers traced the desk's underside, finding a hidden catch, a false panel. With a gentle press it sprang open, revealing a slim ledger bound in black leather. Miss Marple's heart skipped as she opened it, her torch illuminating rows of figures, and names. The entries detailed land transactions, payments to R.C. Robert Carver, surely for surveys on Briar's Knoll. One note stood out: North Ridge transfer, 5,000, pending deed verification, TB to confirm. Tom Briar's initials, linked to a deal that matched his notebook's warning of a false claim. Her torch flickered and she froze, hearing a creak from the hall. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, approached the study. Miss Marple slipped the ledger into her coat, doused the torch, and ducked behind a heavy curtain, its velvet muffling her breath. The door opened and Sir Henry entered, his silhouette stark against the lamplight. He carried a bundle of papers, his face haggard, and moved to the fireplace. With a muttered curse, he tossed the papers into the flames, the fire flaring as they curled and blackened. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, catching a fragment before it burned. Hillside rights disputed. Sir Henry stood, watching the ashes, then left, locking the door behind him. Miss Marple waited, her heart pounding, until silence returned. She emerged, her mind racing. The ledger confirmed Tom's suspicions of a fraudulent land deal, and Sir Henry's act of burning papers suggested guilt or fear. She checked the desk again, finding a small key hidden in an inkwell, likely for another lock within the manor. With no time to linger, she slipped it into her pocket and retraced her steps, locking the study and returning the ornate key to the table. The servant's entrance was her escape, the night air a relief as she stepped into the garden. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the ledger open before her. Its pages detailed payments to Carver for surveys that never occurred, and Tom's role as a verifier who'd uncovered the truth. The burned fragment about Hillside rights aligned with the notebook's warning, pointing to a scheme to claim Briar's Knoll illegally. The small key puzzled her. Perhaps it opened a safe or another room. Lady Eleanor's lavender scent, tied to the scarf and napkin, lingered in her thoughts, as did Elsie's hint of strangers on the knoll. Sir Henry's actions tonight confirmed his involvement, but the motive, greed, desperation, or something darker, remained elusive. Miss Marple locked the ledger with her other clues, her knitting needles clicking as she planned her next move. She would charm Elsie into revealing more about the manor's secrets, perhaps the key's purpose. The village buzzed with Tom's absence, and she needed to trace Carver's movements. For now she had the ledger, a concrete step toward unraveling the Hillside Enigma, and her resolve was as sharp as ever. Chapter 5. A dangerous encounter. The twilight over St. Mary Mead draped the village in a velvet hush, the kind that amplified every rustle and whisper. Miss Jane Marple, her mind alight with the day's discoveries, sat by her cottage window, the black leather ledger from Grayson Manor's study open before her. Its pages, illuminated by a flickering oil lamp, detailed illicit payments to R.C. Robert Carver for fictitious surveys on Briar's Knoll, with Tom Briar's initials marking his role as a verifier who'd uncovered a false land claim. The silk scarf, cigarette case with H.G. initials, leather glove, and cryptic note, "Meet me at the oak, dusk." Urgent rested in her locked desk, joined now by a small key found in the manor's inkwell, its purpose unknown but tantalizing. Sir Henry Grayson's act of burning papers, glimpsed from behind the study's curtain, and Lady Eleanor's nervous denial of the lavender-scented scarf wove a tapestry of deceit. But the stranger, Robert Carver, loomed as a missing thread. Tonight Miss Marple resolved to trace him. Suspecting his movements might unravel the Hillside Enigma further, she dressed for the evening's task in a charcoal coat and a plain shawl, her appearance crafted to fade into the shadows. Her handbag held her torch, a notebook, and the hairpin that had served her so well at the manor. The village gossip, from Mr. Harrow's cheese stall to the Blue Boar's raucous benches, placed Carver near Briar's Knoll at dusk, asking about ruins and maps. Tom's notebook, with its mention of Carver offering £50 for a map, suggested a deeper motive, perhaps tied to the village legend of a Saxon horde buried beneath the knoll's stone circle. Miss Marple's destination was the knoll itself, where the ancient oaken ruins stood as silent sentinels to whatever had befallen Tom Briar. The path to Briar's Knoll was a ribbon of shadow, winding through fields silvered by moonlight. Miss Marple's steps were cautious, her walking stick tapping softly, her senses alert to the night's murmurs, a distant owl, the rustle of leaves, the faint hum of the village settling into sleep. The knoll loomed ahead, its oak a gnarled silhouette against the starry sky, the stone circle's weathered slabs barely visible in the gloom. She paused at the churned earth she'd found days ago, now trampled further, as if someone had returned. Her torch swept the ground, revealing fresh boot prints larger than the gentleman's shoe she'd noted before, suggesting a new visitor. Her heart quickened, but her expression remained calm. Her mind threading possibilities died as she neared the ruins. A low murmur broke the silence, voices, tense and clipped, from the far side of the oak. Miss Marple doused her torch and slipped behind a slab, its cold stone pressing against her coat. She peered through the darkness, her eyes adjusting to the faint glow of a lantern held by a tall figure, Robert Carver, unmistakable in his city coat, its collar turned up against the chill. His sharp features were taut, his voice a low hiss as he spoke to a second man, shorter and stocky, clad in a rough jacket and cap, his face half hidden by shadow. "You were supposed to keep him quiet," Carver snapped, his hand gripping the lantern, its light casting jagged shadows on the stones. "Briar's gone, and now the village is sniffing around. Did you move the box?" The stocky man shifted, his voice gruff. I moved it, like you said. Buried it deeper, near the old well. But Briar knew too much about the deed, the ridge. He was going to talk." Miss Marple's breath caught, her gloved hand tightening on her stick. The box and deed aligned with Tom's notebook and the ledger's entries, confirming a scheme to falsify land rights. Carver's mention of Tom, knowing too much, sent a chill through her, hinting at a darker fate than mere disappearance. She edged closer, the stone shielding her, her ears straining to catch every word. Carver's voice dropped lower, almost a growl. "You're sure no one saw you? That old woman's been poking about Marple, they call her. Sharp as a tack, they say." The stocky man spat, his cap dipping as he shook his head. "No one saw me. But you're the one who left that cigarette. Case sloppy, Carver. If it's got your initials, we're done for." Carver's hand shot out, seizing the man's collar, the lantern swaying wildly. "It's not mine, you fool. It's his Grayson's. He was there, at the oak, when Briar didn't show. I told you, he's in deeper than he lets on." Miss Marple's pulse raced, her mind locking on to the revelation. The cigarette case, etched with H.G., belonged to Sir Henry, not Carver, placing him at the knoll during the mysterious dusk meeting. The stocky man's mention of a buried box near an old well was new, a tangible lead she hadn't anticipated. She pressed herself against the stone, her shawl blending with the shadows. As Carver released his accomplice, his voice cold. "Get the box to London by tomorrow," Carver said, adjusting his coat. "The buyer's waiting. If Grayson tries to back out, we'll use those letters. He'll pay to keep his name clean." The stocky man nodded, muttering, and turned toward the path, his boots crunching on the gravel. Carver lingered, his lantern, casting a final sweep over the ruins before he followed, his silhouette fading into the night. Miss Marple waited, her breath shallow, until the silence returned. She emerged, her torch flicking on briefly to inspect the ground where the men had stood. A glint caught her eye, a small brass button, likely from the stocky man's jacket, its edge worn but distinct. She slipped it into her handbag, her mind alight with the encounter's implications. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the ledger and new button before her, her knitting needles idle for once. The conversation she'd overheard confirmed Carver's role in a scheme with Sir Henry, tied to a falsified deed and a mysterious box. The mention of letters suggested blackmail, perhaps the crumpled papers Sir Henry had burned. Tom's fate loomed darker, his knowledge of the deed had made him a threat, and Carver's words hinted at foul play. The brass button, rough and utilitarian, pointed to an accomplice outside the manor's polished circle, possibly a local laborer or hired thug. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the old well, a crumbling structure near the knoll's base, half hidden by briars. The buried box was her next lead, but searching it risked exposure. She needed to identify Carver's accomplice and trace the letters he'd mentioned. Elsie, the manor's maid, might know more about Sir Henry's papers, and the village's laborers could reveal the stocky man's identity. For now she locked the button with her other clues, her resolve firm. The dangerous encounter had illuminated the scheme's scope, and Miss Marple, with her acute logic, was one step closer to the truth. Chapter 6. Echoes in the ruins, the dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a gentle blush, painting the hills in hues of rose and gold. Miss Jane Marple, ever an early riser, stood at her cottage window, her sharp blue eyes tracing the distant silhouette of Briar's Knoll. The clues she had amassed, the lavender-scented silk scarf, the cigarette case etched with H.G., the leather glove, the cryptic note, the black ledger, and now a brass button lay locked in her desk, each a fragment of the enigma surrounding Tom Briar's disappearance. The ledger's illicit entries, Sir Henry Grayson's burned papers, and the overheard conversation between Robert Carver and his stocky accomplice had sharpened her focus. Carver's mention of a box buried near the old well, coupled with hints of blackmail and a false land claim, pointed to a scheme far grander than she'd first imagined. Today Miss Marple resolved to revisit the knoll's ancient ruins, where village lore whispered of a Saxon horde, and where new evidence might lie hidden among the stones. She dressed in a sturdy tweed skirt and a woolen cardigan, her hat pinned securely against the morning breeze. Her handbag held her torch, a small trowel for discreet digging, and her notebook, its pages already filled with meticulous observations. The brass button, likely from the accomplice's jacket, suggested a local laborer, and the old well mentioned in Carver's heated exchange beckoned as her next lead. As she stepped onto the path to the knoll, The village stirred softly, its chimneys trailing wisps of smoke, the air rich with the scent of dew-soaked grass and baking bread from the distant bakery. Miss Marple's walking stick tapped a steady rhythm, her mind as alert as a hawk's, sifting through the threads of the mystery. The climb to Briar's Knoll was brisk, the morning chill invigorating. The ancient oak loomed at the summit, its gnarled branches casting long shadows over the stone circle, a relic of forgotten rituals half buried in the earth. Miss Marple paused at the churned patch she'd found days ago, now marred by fresh footprints, boots, heavy and broad, matching those from Carver's meeting. She followed the trail to the ruins, where weathered slabs stood like sentinels, their surfaces etched with moss and time. The silence was profound, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a cuckoo. Her torch swept the ground, revealing scuff marks and a faint depression near one stone, as if someone had knelt to dig. Kneeling herself, Miss Marple probed the soil with her trowel, her movements precise. The earth yielded easily, and within moments her tool struck something soft, a blood-stained rag, its coarse fabric stiff with dried crimson. Her breath caught, but her hands remained steady as she lifted it, noting its rough weave, unlike the refined silk of the scarf. The blood, dark and recent, sent a chill through her, conjuring grim thoughts of Tom Briar's fate. She tucked the rag into a handkerchief, her mind racing. Had Tom been harmed here, or was this evidence of another struggle? The accomplice's words, "Briar knew too much," echoed ominously, suggesting violence. She rose, her gaze drawn to the old well, a crumbling stone structure half hidden by briars at the knoll's base. The ledger and Carver's conversation pointed to a buried box, and the well's proximity made it a likely hiding place. Miss Marple approached, her torch illuminating the well's mossy rim. The ground nearby was disturbed, clumps of earth scattered as if hastily turned. She probed gently, uncovering a small metal tin, rusted but intact, its lid jammed shut. Her trowel pried it open, revealing a folded map, its edges frayed, marked with coordinates for the knoll's north ridge, the same ridge Tom's notebook declared falsely claimed by Sir Henry. A scrawled note inside read, "R.C. to deliver to London. 5,000 secured." Miss Marple's pulse quickened, the map confirming the fraudulent land deal and Carver's role as a courier. The blood-stained rag, however, cast a darker shadow. Had Tom been silenced to protect this scheme? She slipped the tin and rag into her handbag, her eyes scanning the ruins for further clues. A glint caught her attention, a broken pocket knife, its handle carved with a crude J.C. She pocketed it, suspecting it belonged to Carver's accomplice, perhaps the stocky man from the previous night. As she stood, a rustle in the briars made her freeze. A figure emerged, a groundskeeper, old Ned, his weathered face creased with suspicion. His eyes, sharp despite his age, fixed on Miss Marple, his hand clutching a rake. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, his voice gruff. "Bit early for a stroll, ain't it? Knoll's no place for poking about." Miss Marple smiled, her tone disarming. "Just enjoying the ruins, Ned. Such history here. Have you seen anyone else up here lately? Tom Briar, perhaps, or a stranger?" Ned's grip on the rake tightened, his eyes darting to the well. "Tom was here often, working for Sir Henry. Too curious. That lad always talking about the old stories, the Saxon horde. Last week I saw a city fellow, tall, sniffing around the stones. Didn't like the look of him." Miss Marple nodded, her mind locking onto Ned's words. The city fellow was surely Carver, and his interest in the hoard aligned with the map's coordinates. "Most interesting," she said. "And these ruins, do you believe the treasure tailies?" Ned snorted, leaning on his rake. "Fanciful nonsense, miss, but folk like Tom believed it. Said he found something odd up here, wouldn't say what. Next day he was gone." Miss Marple thanked him, her smile masking her racing thoughts. Ned's warning and Tom's mention of something odd deepened the mystery. As he shuffled off, she lingered, her torch sweeping the stones one last time. The ruins seemed to whisper, their ancient secrets entwined with the knoll's modern crimes. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple spread her findings on her table: the blood-stained rag, the rusted tin with its map, and the broken pocket-knife. The map confirmed the ledger's evidence of a land fraud, with Carver as the scheme's courier. The rag's blood suggested violence, possibly tied to Tom's disappearance, while the knife's J.C. Initials pointed to an accomplice, perhaps Jem Carter, the estate worker from the Blue Boar. The village lore of a Saxon hoard, though fanciful, explained Carver's fixation on the ruins, but Miss Marple suspected that treasure was a pretext. For the land deals profits. She locked the clues away, her knitting needles clicking as she planned her next move. The old well's secrets were hers now, but the blood-stained rag demanded caution. She would visit the village tomorrow, probing Jem Carter's role and seeking Elsie's insights into the manor's hidden locks. For now, she had marked the ruins as a site of truth, and her acute logic was poised to unravel its echoes. Chapter 7. A Coded Message. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate shadows across her sitting room. The air held the faint sweetness of Darjeeling tea, but her thoughts were far from tranquil. The clues amassed from Briar's Knoll, the lavender-scented silk scarf, the cigarette case etched with H.G., the leather glove, the cryptic note, the black ledger, the brass button, the blood-stained rag, the rusted tin with its map, and the pocket-knife marked J.C., lay locked in her desk, each a piece of a puzzle growing ever more intricate. The ledger's illicit land deals, Sir Henry Grayson's burned papers, Robert Carver's clandestine meeting, and the ruin's grim discoveries pointed to a scheme of fraud and possible violence. Tom Briar's disappearance, tied to his knowledge of a false land claim, loomed darker with the blood-stained rag's discovery. Today Miss Marple resolved to visit Mary Briar, hoping Tom's notebook, mentioned days ago, might yield a new thread, perhaps the key to the box buried near the old well, or the blackmail letters Carver had referenced. She dressed in a soft green coat and a hat adorned with a modest ribbon, her appearance calculated to soothe Mary's frayed nerves. Her handbag held her notebook, a pencil, and the small key from the manor's inkwell, its purpose still a mystery. As she stepped into St. Mary Mead's morning bustle, the village hummed with life. Children scampered toward the schoolhouse, and farmers trundled carts toward the market. The path to Mary's cottage wound past ivy-clad walls, the air sharp with the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. Miss Marple's walking stick tapped a steady rhythm, her mind sifting through the ruins' echoes, the map's coordinates, the blood's grim portent, and old Ned's tale of a Saxon hoard. Mary's cottage was a haven of simplicity, its garden bright with late asters, despite the owner's evident strain. Mary stood at the gate, her dark eyes shadowed, a basket of apples in her arms. She brightened at Miss Marple's approach, though her smile was brittle. "Miss Marple, you're kind to come again," Mary said, setting the basket down. "I've been turning over Tom's things like you asked. That notebook, it's got me puzzled." Miss Marple settled on a garden bench, her tone warm. "You've been very brave, Mary. May I see it? Tom's notes might tell us where he went or what he found." Mary nodded, fetching the worn leather notebook from the cottage. Its pages, already familiar to Miss Marple, were a jumble of measurements and sketches of Briar's Knoll, with entries like H.G. claims Northridge. False. Check deed. But tucked into the back, secured by a frayed ribbon, was a folded scrap of paper she hadn't noticed before. Mary's voice trembled as she handed it over. "I found this yesterday, slipped inside. It's not Tom's writing, looks like a code or something." Miss Marple unfolded the paper, her pulse quickening. The text was a series of numbers and letters, scrawled in black ink. 3712, RC2L, PNNTFR, SLNC, 5000 Oak Dusk. Below it, a single line in Tom's hand read, "Don't trust H.G." Her eyes narrowed, the code's meaning elusive but suggestive. The R.C. matched Robert Carver, and PMNTFR SLNC hinted at the blackmail letters mentioned in the ruins. The numbers, the 7th of March 12, could be a date, a location, or a cipher, and Oak Dusk echoed the cigarette case's note. She traced the letters, her mind working like a loom, weaving patterns from chaos. "This is most helpful, Mary," she said, her voice steady. "Did Tom ever mention a code or someone he met at the Oak?" Mary shook her head, twisting her apron. "No, but he was scared, Miss Marple. Said he'd found papers that could ruin someone big, wouldn't say who. He kept looking out the window, like he expected trouble." Miss Marple patted her hand, her thoughts racing. The coded note confirmed Tom's entanglement in the land. Fraud with Carver as a key player. The warning about Sir Henry. "Don't trust H.G." aligned with the cigarette case and ledger, but the code's numbers puzzled her. She tucked the note into her notebook, promising Mary to keep her informed, and rose to leave. As she stepped onto the path, a shadow moved across the street, a tall figure in a city coat, his sharp features unmistakable. Robert Carver, lurking near a hedgerow, his eyes fixed on her with a glint of menace. Miss Marple's heart skipped, but her expression remained serene, her stick tapping as she walked toward the village square. Carver followed at a distance, his footsteps deliberate, his presence a silent threat. She paused at Mrs. Weatherby's flower stall, selecting a bunch of chrysanthemums while her peripheral vision tracked him. He lingered by the church, pretending to read a notice board, but his gaze never left her. Miss Marple paid for the flowers, her mind alert. Carver's surveillance suggested he knew of her inquiries, perhaps from the accomplice, or even Sir Henry. She decided to test him, weaving through the market's bustle to the post office, where Miss Clara Finch's sharp memory might offer new insights. The post office smelled of ink and wax, its counter cluttered with parcels. Miss Finch greeted her with a nod, her spectacles glinting. "Morning, Miss Marple," she said, sorting letters. "More stamps, or are you after village news?" Miss Marple smiled, her tone light. "A bit of both, Clara. I hear that stranger, Robert Carver, has been about. Did he send any letters, perhaps to London?" Miss Finch's eyes gleamed, sensing gossip. "Oh, aye. He sent a package last week. Heavy one to a London address, some firm called Blackwood and Sons. Paid extra for haste. Seemed jumpy, kept checking the door." Miss Marple's pulse quickened, but she nodded calmly. "Most curious. And Sir Henry any recent mail from him?" Miss Finch leaned closer, her voice low. "He's been sending telegrams, Miss Marple. One to Bath, another to London, all in a rush. And Lady Eleanor, she posted a letter yesterday, sealed tight, to a solicitor in Exeter." Miss Marple thanked her, filing away the details. Blackwood and Sons could be the buyer, Carver mentioned, and Sir Henry's telegrams suggested panic. Lady Eleanor's letter to a solicitor hinted at personal troubles, perhaps tied to her bruise. As she left the post office, Carver was gone, but the prickle of being watched lingered. She resolved to move carefully, her every step now under scrutiny. That afternoon, Miss Marple sat in the village tea-room, a cozy nook of floral wallpaper and clinking china. She sipped tea, her notebook open, deciphering the coded note. The numbers 3712 resisted easy interpretation, but PNTFRSLNC and Oak Dusk pointed to a payoff at the knoll, likely the meeting where Sir Henry left his cigarette case. She sketched possible ciphers, recalling village lore, of smugglers using codes during the war. A simple substitution shifting letters by 3 yielded nothing, but pairing the numbers with the alphabet hinted at a meeting date, March 7th, 1912, far too old. Perhaps it was a map coordinate or a page in the ledger dot. Her thoughts were interrupted by Jem Carter, the estate worker from the Blue Boar, entering the tea-room. His ruddy face was tense, his jacket missing a brass button that matched the one in her desk. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, but she smiled as he passed, noting his quick glance at her table. The J.C. on the pocket-knife could be his, marking him as Carver's accomplice. She resolved to question him later, perhaps at the pub, where tongues loosened over ale dot as evening fell. Miss Marple returned to her cottage, the coded note burning in her mind. She spread it beside the ledger and map, her knitting needles clicking. As she worked, the note confirmed Carver's blackmail scheme, with Sir Henry as a reluctant player. Jem Carter's involvement, suggested by the button and knife, added a local dimension, while the blood-stained rag kept Tom's fate in question. She locked the note away, her plan clear, set a trap for Carver, using his surveillance to her advantage. Tomorrow she would spread a rumor in the village, perhaps about a found clue on the knoll, and watch his reaction. Miss Marple's fire crackled, her resolve as sharp as the needles in her hands. The coded message had unveiled a layer of the Hillside Enigma, and her acute logic was poised to unravel its secrets. Chapter 8. The trap sprung the morning, and St. Mary Mead unfolded with a deceptive calm, the kind that cloaked secrets beneath a veneer of routine. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her cottage table, sipped her morning tea, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the coded note from Tom Brier's notebook, its cryptic scrawl, 3712 RC to LPMNTFRSLNC, 5000 Oak Dusk, etched in her mind. The note tucked safely in her locked desk alongside the lavender-scented scarf, the H.G. cigarette case, the leather glove, the black ledger, the brass button, the blood-stained rag, the rusted tin's map, and the J.C. pocket-knife had deepened the enigma of Tom's disappearance. The ledger's illicit land deals, Carver's overheard blackmail scheme, and the ruin's grim relics pointed to a conspiracy centered on Briar's Knoll. Robert Carver's menacing. Surveillance in the village yesterday confirmed he saw her as a threat, and Miss Marple, with her acute logic, resolved to turn that threat to her advantage. Today, at the vicarage tea party, she would set a trap, spreading a rumor to lure Carver back to the knoll and reveal his next move. She dressed with care, choosing a lavender frock, its hue a subtle nod to the scarf, and a hat with a modest veil, her appearance crafted to blend with the village matrons. Her handbag held her notebook, a pencil, and the small key from the Manor's inkwell, its purpose still elusive. The vicarage, a rambling stone house beside the church, was a short walk, its garden abuzz with preparations for the afternoon's charity tea. Miss Marple's plan was simple yet daring. She would mention a found clue on Briar's Knoll, vague enough to pique curiosity, but specific enough to draw Carver out. The village's gossip network, faster than any telegram, would ensure. The rumor reached him. The vicarage lawn was a tapestry of color, with trestle tables draped in white linen and laden with scones, jam tarts, and steaming teapots. Villagers mingled, their chatter a lively Mrs. Price lamenting her lost tabby, Miss Hartnell extolling the virtues of her rose garden, the vicar, Mr. Clement, beaming as he welcomed guests. Miss Marple slipped into the crowd, her unassuming figure drawing little notice, though her ears caught every whisper. She joined a group near the rose arbor, where Mrs. Weatherby and Miss Finch were discussing Tom Briar's absence with hushed urgency. Such a shame about young Tom, Miss Marple said, her tone sympathetic as she poured tea. I was walking on Briar's Knoll yesterday, and found something odd, a metal box, half buried near the ruins. I left it there, thinking it might belong to someone. Mrs. Weatherby's eyes widened, her teacup pausing mid-her. A box? On the knoll? Why, that's where Tom worked. Could it be his? Miss Finch leaned closer, her spectacles glinting. Sounds suspicious, Miss Marple. That stranger Carver, wasn't it? Was asking about the knoll. I wouldn't be surprised if he's involved. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene but her heart quickening. The bait was set, and the village's gossip mill would carry it to Carver, who, if her instincts were correct, would rush to the knoll to secure the box. She sipped her tea, her eyes scanning the crowd. Jem Carter, the estate worker with the missing brass button, stood by the vicar, his ruddy face tense as he glanced her way. His G.C. initials matched the pocket-knife from the ruins, marking him as Carver's likely accomplice. She made a mental note to watch him, perhaps at the Blue Boar later dot. As the tea party wound down, Miss Marple excused herself, citing a headache, and slipped away to Briar's Knoll. The afternoon light bathed the hill in gold, the ancient oak's branches swaying gently. She chose a vantage point behind a thicket of briars, her dark shawl blending with the foliage, and settled to wait. Her handbag held her torch and notebook, ready to record Carver's actions. The ruins, with their weathered stones, stood silent, but the churned earth near the old well hinted at recent activity. Miss Marple's pulse steadied, her mind as sharp as a blade, anticipating the trap's outcome. Dusk crept over the knoll, the sky deepening to indigo. A rustle broke the silence. and Robert Carver emerged, his city coat stark against the fading light, a shovel in hand. His sharp features were taut, his eyes darting as he scanned the ruins. He moved to the well, kneeling to dig with frantic precision, the shovel biting into the earth. Miss Marple watched, her breath shallow, as he unearthed a small wooden box. Its surface scarred and locked. Carver's hands trembled as he pried it open, revealing a bundle of paper's letters by their look tied with string. He muttered, his voice low but audible. Grayson's letters? Enough to ruin him. Miss Marple's heart raced, the letters confirming the blackmail scheme she'd overheard. Carver's haste suggested fear of her rumor, perhaps, or of his accomplice's betrayal. She noted the box's location, near the well's crumbling rim, and memorized its details: oak, iron-banded, no larger than a cigar box. Carver stuffed the papers into his coat, reburied the box, and stood, his lantern casting wild shadows as he glanced around. Miss Marple pressed deeper into the briars, her shawl catching on thorns, but he didn't see her. He strode off, his footsteps fading toward the village. She emerged, her torch sweeping the ground. Carver's digging had left fresh marks, and a glint caught her eye, a silver pen, dropped in his haste, its barrel engraved with R.C. She pocketed it, her mind alight. The pen tied Carver directly to the box, and the letters, if they were the blackmail documents, held the key to Sir Henry's involvement. The blood-stained rag from the ruins loomed in her thoughts. Had Tom been harmed to protect these secrets? She marked the box's location with a small stone, intending to return with the constable, though she suspected Carver would move it again. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple spread her new clue, the silver pen, beside the coded note and ledger. The trap had worked, exposing Carver's desperation and the letter's importance. The box's contents, glimpsed briefly, confirmed the blackmail scheme with Sir Henry as the target. Jim Carter's presence at the tea party and his missing button strengthened her suspicion of his role as the accomplice. The coded notes, PMNTFRSLNC, now seemed clearer demand for silence about the fraudulent land deal. She locked the pen away, her knitting needles clicking as she planned her next move. The village's gossip would soon buzz with her rumor, and Carver's actions would draw scrutiny. She would alert the constable to the box's location, framing it as a chance find, and seek Elsie's insights into the manor's locked rooms, where the small key might fit. For now the trap had sprung, yielding a glimpse of the Hillside Enigma's heart, and Miss Marple's acute logic was poised to press forward. Chapter 9. The Constable's Doubt. The morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead like a gossamer veil, softening the edges of the village's thatched roofs and cobblestone lanes. Miss Jane Marple, ever attuned to the subtlest shifts in atmosphere, stood at her cottage door, her sharp blue eyes tracing the path to Briar's Knoll. Her desk held a growing treasury of clues: the lavender-scented silk scarf, the cigarette case with H.G. initials, the leather glove, the cryptic note, the black ledger, the brass button, the blood-stained rag, the rusted tin's map, the pocket-knife marked J.C., and the silver pen engraved with R.C., each a thread in the tapestry of Tom Briar's disappearance. The trap she'd set at the vicarage tea party had worked, luring Robert Carver to the knoll, where she'd watched him unearth a wooden box of letters confirming a blackmail scheme tied to Sir Henry Grayson's fraudulent land deal. The box's location, near the old well, was her next lead, and she resolved to bring it to the attention of Constable Barnes, framing it as a chance find to avoid revealing her clandestine efforts. Yet Carver's menacing surveillance and the blood-stained rag kept her cautious, hinting at darker deeds. She dressed in a practical tweed coat and a hat with a modest brim, her appearance crafted to deflect suspicion. Her handbag held her notebook, the silver pen, and the small key from the Manor's inkwell, its purpose still a mystery. The constable's office, a squat building beside the village hall, was a short walk through the waking market square, where vendors were setting up stalls of apples and fresh bread. Miss Marple's steps were brisk, her walking stick tapping a rhythm, her mind sifting through the previous night's revelations, Carver's frantic digging, the letters that could ruin Sir Henry, and Jim Carter's likely role as the accomplice with the J.C. initials. The coded notes hint of payment for silence, and the ledger's illicit entries pointed to a conspiracy. But the blood on the rag suggested Tom might have paid a graver price. Constable Barnes, a burly man with a walrus mustache, greeted her with a nod, his desk cluttered with reports and a steaming mug of tea. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, his tone genial but wary. "What brings you here? Not another lost cat, I hope?" Miss Marple smiled, settling into a chair. "Nothing so trivial, Constable. I was walking on Briar's Knoll yesterday, and noticed something odd near the old well. A wooden box, half buried, as if someone hid it in haste. It seemed out of place, given Tom Briar's disappearance." Barnes's bushy brows rose, but his eyes narrowed with skepticism. "A box, you say, on the knoll? Likely just rubbish, miss. Young Tom probably ran off to London lads do that, you know." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her tone gentle but firm. "Perhaps, but the knoll's been disturbed lately. Fresh earth. Boot prints. Tom worked there for Sir Henry, and the village is quite concerned. Might you take a look?" Barnes sighed, rubbing his neck. "All right, Miss Marple, I'll humor you. Let's go now, before the day gets busy." They set out for the knoll, the constable's heavy tread contrasting Miss Marple's light steps. The morning air was crisp, the oak's gnarled silhouette looming against a sky streaked with clouds. Miss Marple led him to the old well, its crumbling stones veiled in briars, and pointed to the spot where she'd seen Carver dig. Her heart sank as they approached. The ground was smooth, the churned earth gone, as if someone had swept it clean. The box was nowhere in sight, only a faint depression marking its former place. Barnes knelt, poking the soil with a stick, his face creasing with doubt. "Nothing here, Miss Marple." "You sure you saw a box? Could have been a trick of the light." Miss Marple's eyes scanned the ground, noting fresh tire tracks leading from the well to the path below, a narrow gauge. "Likely a motorbike or cart." "I'm quite certain, Constable," she said, her voice steady. "The ground's been smoothed over, and those tracks are new. Someone moved it, perhaps last night." Barnes stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "Tracks don't prove much, miss. Could be farmers or kids mucking about. I'll note it, but I reckon Tom's just skipped town." Miss Marple nodded, masking her frustration. The constable's dismissal was expected, but the tire tracks were a new clue, suggesting Carver, or his accomplice had acted swiftly after her trap. As they descended the knoll, she spotted a villager Mrs. Tadley, a farmer's wife with a keen eye for gossip, watching from the path. Miss Marple approached, her smile disarming. "Good morning, Mrs. Tadley," she said, pausing. "You're out early. Have you seen anyone near the knoll lately? There's been some odd activity." Mrs. Tadley's eyes gleamed, her voice low. "Oh, aye, Miss Marple. Last night I saw Lady Eleanor herself, walking near the well, looked nervous. She did, carrying a small spade. Didn't think much of it till now." Miss Marple's pulse quickened, but her expression remained serene. "Lady Eleanor? Most curious. Thank you, Mrs. Tadley. The sort to muck about in the dirt." Miss Marple smiled, letting his doubt slide. Lady Eleanor's presence at the well, with a spade, tied her to the scarf's lavender scent, and deepened her role in the mystery. The tire tracks suggested a vehicle, perhaps Jem Carter's, given his estate work and the J.C. knife. As they returned to the village, Miss Marple resolved to confront Lady Eleanor, framing it as a friendly visit to probe her nocturnal activities. Back in the village, Miss Marple stopped at the post office to test Miss Finch's memory. The postmistress, sorting letters, greeted her with a knowing nod. "Back again, Miss Marple?" Miss Finch said, pushing up her spectacles. "Heard you were at the knoll with Barnes. Find anything?" Miss Marple's tone was light. "Not yet, Clara, but I'm curious. Has Lady Eleanor sent any more letters recently, perhaps to that Exeter solicitor?" Miss Finch's eyes gleamed. "Funny you ask. She dropped off a package this morning, sealed tight, addressed to the same solicitor, Mr. Hargrove, in Exeter. Looked anxious, kept glancing out the window." Miss Marple thanked her, her mind racing. Lady Eleanor's package, following her knoll visit, suggested she was hiding something, perhaps the box itself, or papers related to the blackmail letters. The tire tracks pointed to a hasty removal, and Jem Carter, with his estate access, was a likely suspect. She decided to visit the Blue Boar that evening, where Jem often drank, to gauge his reaction to her no-rumored dot. The pub was a warm haze of ale and tobacco, its benches filled with laborers unwinding after the day. Miss Marple, an unusual sight, drew curious glances as she settled at a corner table with a glass of elderflower cordial. Jem Carter sat with two mates, his ruddy face flushed, his jacket still missing the brass button. She caught his eye, offering a nod, and mentioned to the barmaid, loud enough for him to hear, "Such a pity about that box on the knoll. I told the constable, but it's vanished. Someone's been quick to cover their tracks." Jem's pint paused mid-her, his eyes narrowing. He muttered something to his mates and left abruptly, his boots heavy on the floor. Miss Marple sipped her cordial, her heart steady. His reaction confirmed his involvement, likely as Carver's accomplice. The tire tracks, Lady Eleanor's spade, and Jem's unease wove a new pattern in her mind, dotted her cottage that night. Miss Marple spread her notebook beside the silver pen and coded note. The constable's doubt had been a setback, but the tire tracks and Mrs. Tadley's sighting of Lady Eleanor were breakthroughs. The box's removal suggested Carver's vigilance, but Lady Eleanor's role linked to the scarf, and now the spade hinted at her own secrets, perhaps fear of Sir Henry, or complicity in the scheme. Jem's reaction at the pub strengthened his link to the J.C. Knife and button. She locked her clues away, her knitting needles clicking as she planned her next move. A visit to Lady Eleanor, framed as concern for her health, would probe. Her knoll visit, Young's movements warranted watching, perhaps through the pub's gossip. For now the constable's doubt had sharpened her resolve, and Miss Marple's acute logic was ready to unravel the next thread of the Hillside Enigma. Chapter 10. A Lady's Secret. The late morning sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden glow, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill of suspicion that gripped Miss Jane Marple's thoughts. Her cottage, a haven of chintz and polished oak, held a growing cache of clues: the lavender-scented silk scarf, the cigarette case with H.G. initials, the leather glove, the cryptic note, the black ledger, the brass button, the blood-stained rag, the rusted tin's map, the pocket-knife marked J.C., and the silver pen engraved with R.C., the coded note, the 7th of March 12 R.C. to L. P.M.N. T.F.R.S.L.N.C. 5000, oak dusk, and the vanished wooden box of blackmail letters, glimpsed during her trap on Briar's Knoll, pointed to a conspiracy of fraud and danger. The constable's dismissal of her findings, coupled with Mrs. Tadley's sighting of Lady Eleanor with a spade near the Knoll's old well, had sharpened Miss Marple's focus. Today she resolved to confront Lady Eleanor at Grayson Manor, framing it as a neighborly visit to probe her nocturnal activities and the lavender scent tying her to the Knoll. Miss Marple, dressed with calculated care, choosing a soft blue frock and a hat adorned with a single rose, her appearance designed to soothe rather than alarm. Her handbag held her notebook, the small key from the Manor's inkwell still a mystery, and a sprig of lavender, a subtle prompt for Lady Eleanor. The walk to Grayson Manor was brisk, the lane lined with hedgerows heavy with late berries, the air rich with the scent of earth and distant wood smoke. Her mind sifted through the threads of the enigma: Sir Henry's agitation, Robert Carver's blackmail scheme, Jem Carter's likely role as the J.C. accomplice, and the blood-stained rag that hinted at Tom Briar's grim fate. Lady Eleanor's spade and her package to an Exeter solicitor suggested she was more than a bystander, perhaps a victim or a conspirator in the Knoll's secrets. Manor's iron gates stood open, a rare lapse in their usual vigilance. Miss Marple was ushered through the gravel drive by Elsie, the young maid whose nervous glances had betrayed knowledge of the Manor's secrets. The drawing-room was as opulent as before: velvet drapes, a gleaming chandelier, a fire crackling in the marble hearth, but the air was heavy with unspoken tension. Lady Eleanor, in a pale green gown, rose to greet her, her smile fragile, her dark eyes shadowed. The bruise on her wrist, noted during Miss Marple's last visit, was fainter but still visible beneath a silk scarf lavender-scented. Miss Marple noted, her pulse quickening. "Miss Marple, how kind of you to visit again," Lady Eleanor said. Her voice strained as she poured tea. "I hope you're well, despite the village's troubles." Miss Marple settled into an armchair, her tone warm but probing. "Quite well, thank you, Lady Eleanor. Though I confess, the village is abuzz about Tom Briar. I heard an odd tale that you were seen near Briar's Knoll last night with a spade. Surely a mistake?" Lady Eleanor's cup rattled, tea splashing onto the saucer. Her face paled, her fingers twisting the scarf. "The Knoll? Oh, no, I was merely walking, clearing my head. The Manor can be stifling, you know." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes gentle but unyielding. "Of course. Though it's curious the Knoll's been disturbed lately, and I found a scarf there, lavender-scented, much like yours. And now this talk of a spade. You must be under such strain, with Sir Henry so busy." Lady Eleanor's lips trembled, her gaze darting to the door. "Henry's preoccupied with estate matters. Tom's absence has upset him terribly. I know nothing of a spade or a scarf, Miss Marple, truly." Miss Marple nodded, letting the silence stretch, her eyes catching a glint from Lady Eleanor's neck, a gold locket, half hidden by her gown's collar. It was ornate, with a floral engraving, and matched Mary Briar's description of a family. Heirloom Tom had mentioned, lost years ago. Her heart quickened, but she kept her tone light. "What a lovely locket, Lady Eleanor. A family piece, perhaps." Lady Eleanor's hand flew to her neck, her fingers closing over the locket. "This? Oh, it's an old trinket, nothing special." Her voice cracked, and she rose abruptly. Murmuring about checking the kitchen dat as Lady Eleanor left, Miss Marple seized the moment. She drifted to a side table, where a jewelry box sat, its lid ajar. Inside, among pearls and brooches, was a folded letter, its edge marked with a solicitor's seal, Hargrove, Exeter. She didn't touch it, but noted its presence, suspecting it was the package Miss Finch had mentioned. Elsie entered, carrying a tray of biscuits, and Miss Marple caught her eye, her smile disarming. "Elsie, dear," she said, "you must hear." All sorts of things in the manner. Has Lady Eleanor seemed troubled lately? Perhaps about Tom Briar or the Knoll? Elsie's hands fumbled, a biscuit tumbling to the floor. "She's been quiet, miss. Keeps to her room, writing letters. I heard her crying once after Sir Henry shouted about papers. And she's been out at night, says it's for air, but she takes a spade." Miss Marple's pulse raced, but she nodded calmly. "Thank you, Elsie. You're most helpful." Lady Eleanor returned, her composure restored, but her eyes avoided Miss Marple's. The conversation turned to village matters, but Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. The locket, matching Tom's heirloom, suggested a personal connection, perhaps blackmail, tying Lady Eleanor to the Knoll's secrets. Elsie's confirmation of her night-time excursions and the solicitor's letter deepened the mystery. As Miss Marple rose to leave, she noticed Sir Henry in the hall, his face haggard, a telegram in hand. He barely acknowledged her, his eyes fixed on Lady Eleanor with a mix of anger and fear. Back in the village, Miss Marple stopped at the jeweler's, a tiny shop run by Mr. Giles, whose memory for trinkets rivaled her own for gossip. She described the locket, framing it as curiosity about a friend's heirloom. Mr. Giles adjusted his spectacles, his voice thoughtful. "A gold locket, floral engraving? Sounds like the Grayson family piece, stolen years ago from Sir Henry's. Mother, Tom Briar mentioned it once, said it was his nan's, passed down before the Graysons claimed it. Odd that." Miss Marple's heart skipped, but she smiled. "Most interesting, Mr. Giles, thank you." The locket's history tied Tom to the Graysons, perhaps explaining his involvement in the land deal. Had he demanded its return, triggering blackmail or worse? Miss Marple returned to her cottage, her mind alight. She spread her notebook beside, a silver pen and coded note, sketching the locket's design. Lady Eleanor's spade, her solicitor's letter, and the locket pointed to a personal stake-fear of Sir Henry, or complicity in hiding the box. Jem Carter's role, confirmed by his pub reaction, and Carver's surveillance loomed large. Miss Marple locked her notebook away, her knitting needles clicking as she planned her next move. The locket was a breakthrough, but she would keep it secret, tracing its origins through village records. Lady Eleanor's distress warranted another visit, and Jem's involvement needed probing. For now the lady's secret had unveiled a new layer of the Hillside Enigma, and Miss Marple's acute logic was poised to unravel it further. Chapter 11. The Locket's Tale. The morning in St. Mary Mead dawned with a crystalline clarity, the kind that sharpened the senses and illuminated hidden truths. Miss Jane Marple stood at her cottage window, her sharp blue eyes tracing the distant curve of Briar's Knoll, where the ancient oak stood sentinel over secrets. Her desk held a trove of clues, the lavender-scented silk scarf, the cigarette case with H.G. initials, the leather glove, the cryptic note, the black ledger, the brass button, the blood-stained rag, the rusted tin's map, the pocket-knife marked J.C., and the silver pen engraved with R.C., the coded note, the 7th of March 12 R.C. to L. P.M.N. T.F.R.S.L.N.C. 5000. Oak dusk, and the vanished box of blackmail letters had deepened the enigma of Tom Briar's disappearance. Lady Eleanor's locket, matching a lost heirloom Tom had claimed as his. Families had cast her in a new light, her spade-wielding visit to the knoll, and her solicitor's letter hinting at a personal stake. Today Miss Marple resolved to trace the locket's history through village records and confront Jem Carter, whose missing button and J.C. knife marked him as Carver's accomplice. Hoping to uncover Tom's fate, she dressed in a practical gray coat and a hat with a subtle veil, her appearance crafted to blend with the village's morning bustle. Her handbag held her notebook, the small key from the Manor's inkwell still a mystery, and a sketch of the locket's floral engraving. The village library, overseen by Miss Lavender, was her first stop, its dusty shelves a treasure trove of St. Mary Mead's history. The walk through the market square was brisk, the air rich with the scent of fresh bread and autumn leaves, vendors calling out their wares. Miss Marple's walking stick tapped a steady rhythm, her mind sifting through Lady Eleanor's distress, Jem's pub reaction, and the tire tracks that had erased the box's hiding place. Miss Lavender greeted her with a smile, her spectacles glinting as she dusted a ledger. "Miss Marple, always a pleasure. Looking for something particular today?" Miss Marple's tone was light but purposeful. "I'm curious about an old Grayson family heirloom, a gold locket, floral engraving. I hear it was stolen years ago, perhaps linked to the Briar family." Miss Lavender's eyes widened, and she fetched a heavy tome labeled St. Mary Mead. Estates 1880 to 1910. Flipping to a faded page, she traced a finger over cramped handwriting. Here it is, 1895, a locket reported stolen from Lady Margaret Grayson, Sir Henry's mother. Gold, floral design with a miniature of her late husband inside. Rumor was it ended up with the Briars, though no proof. Tom's grandmother, Eliza Briar, worked as a maid at the manor then. Miss Marple's pulse quickened, but her expression remained serene. "Most interesting. Was there ever a dispute over it?" Miss Lavender nodded, turning a page. "Oh, Eliza claimed it was a gift from Lady Margaret for her service, but the Graysons called it theft. No charges filed, but bad blood lingered. Tom mentioned it once, said it was his family's by right." Miss Marple thanked her, her mind racing. The locket's history tied Tom to the Graysons, perhaps fueling his probe into the land deal. Had he confronted Lady Eleanor, demanding its return, only to stumble on the fraudulent scheme? She left the library, her next destination the Blue Boar, where Jem Carter's nightly pints offered a chance to test his guilt. The pub was a warm haze of ale and chatter, its timber-bird walls alive with the hum of laborers. Miss Marple, an incongruous figure, settled at a corner table with a glass of elderflower cordial, her eyes scanning for Jem. He sat alone, his ruddy face flushed, his jacket still missing the brass button that matched her clue. She approached, her smile disarming, and took a seat opposite him. "Good evening, Jem," she said, her tone gentle. "The village is quite stirred about Tom Briar. I hear you worked with him on the knoll." "Did ha?" Jem's pint froze midder, his eyes narrowing. "Tom? He was always poking about, talking of old grudges. Said the Graysons owed his family something a locket, maybe. Got him in a right state with Sir Henry." Miss Marple nodded, her voice soft. "And you?" "I found a knife on the knoll, marked J.C. Curious, don't you think?" Jem's face paled, his hand trembling as he set down his glass. "Knife? Ain't mine, miss. Lots of folk up there, working for Sir Henry. You'd best leave it be, Knowles. No place for meddling." His denial was too quick, his unease palpable. Miss Marple thanked him, returning to her table, her heart steady. Jem's reaction confirmed his role as Carver's accomplice, and his mention of the locket tied it to Tom's dispute with Sir Henry. As she sipped her cordial, she noticed a shadow outside the pub's window. Robert Carver, his city coat unmistakable, watching her with a cold stare. He vanished into the night, but his presence sent a chill through her. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple spread her notebook beside the silver pen and coded note. The locket's history, confirmed by Miss Lavender, suggested Tom had confronted Lady Eleanor, perhaps triggering the blackmail scheme. Jem's denial and Carver's surveillance tightened the web. Jem as the J.C. accomplice, Carver as the orchestrator. The blood-stained rag loomed, hinting at violence, but the locket was a personal thread, perhaps Lady Eleanor's motive for her knoll visit with a spade. She locked her clues away, her knitting needles clicking as she planned her next move. Locket's tale warranted another visit to Lady Eleanor, framed as concern for Tom's family. Carver's watchfulness required caution, perhaps a decoy to throw him off. For now the locket had unveiled a deeper motive in the Hillside Enigma, and Miss Marple's acute logic was poised to unravel its next twist. Chapter 12. A shadow in the lane. The afternoon sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows that danced across the village's cobblestone lanes. Miss Jane Marple, her mind a whirl of connections, stood at her cottage door, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the distant silhouette of Briar's Knoll. Her desk held a growing trove of clues: the lavender-scented silk scarf, the cigarette case with H.G. initials, the leather glove, the cryptic note, the black ledger, the brass button, the blood-stained rag, the rusted tins map, the pocket-knife marked J.C., and the silver pen engraved with R.C. The coded note: the 7th of March, 12 R.C. to L. P.M.N.T. F.R.S.L.N.C. 5000. Oak dusk, and the locket's history as a disputed heirloom tied Tom Briar to the Graysons, deepening the mystery of his disappearance. Robert Carver's surveillance, Jem Carter's nervous denial, and Lady Eleanor's spade-wielding visit to the knoll suggested a web of fraud and blackmail with the blood-stained rag hinting at darker deeds. Today, Miss Marple resolved to visit Mary Briar again, hoping to uncover more about the locket and Tom's final days. While staying alert for Carver's watchful eyes, she dressed in a muted brown coat and a hat with a simple band. Her appearance, crafted to deflect notice in the village's afternoon bustle. Her handbag held her notebook, the small key from the Manor's inkwell still untested, and a sketch of the locket's floral engraving. The walk to Mary's cottage was familiar, the lane lined with hedgerows heavy with late blackberries, the air crisp with the scent of autumn leaves and distant chimney smoke. Miss Marple's walking stick tapped a steady rhythm, her mind sifting through Jem's pub admission, Lady Eleanor's distress, and the vanished box of blackmail letters. Carver's shadow, glimpsed outside the Blue Boar, loomed as a threat, urging caution. Mary's cottage was a quiet refuge, its garden faded but neat, a testament to her resilience. Mary greeted Miss Marple at the door, her dark eyes heavy with worry, a basket of mending in her arms. "Miss Marple, you're a blessing," she said, her voice soft. "I've been going through Tom's things again, hoping for answers." Miss Marple settled on a garden bench, her tone warm. "You're very brave, Mary. I've been thinking about that locket Tom mentioned, a family heirloom, gold with a floral design. Did he ever say where he last saw it?" Mary's hands stilled, her face paling. "The locket?" He talked of it often, said it was our Nan's, taken by the Graysons years ago. Last month he told me he'd seen it at the Manor on Lady Eleanor. Got him proper angry, said he'd confront her, get it back for us." Miss Marple's pulse quickened, but her expression remained serene. "Confront her? That's bold." "Did he mention meeting anyone else, perhaps at the Knoll?" Mary shook her head, tears welling. "Only that he was meeting someone at dusk, wouldn't say who. He left his notebook, said it'd explain everything if he didn't come back. That was the last I saw him." Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind racing. Tom's confrontation with Lady Eleanor over the locket likely led him to the land fraud, making him a threat to Sir Henry and Carver. The coded notes, oak dusk meeting, tied to the cigarette case, suggested he'd met Sir Henry or Carver at the Knoll, with dire results. She thanked Mary, promising to keep searching, and rose to leave. As she stepped onto the lane, a prickle of unease stopped her, a faint rustle in the hedgerow, the snap of a twig. She glanced back, catching a shadow moving behind a tree, too fleeting to identify, but deliberate in its stealth. Her heart steadied, but her senses sharpened as she walked toward the village, choosing a narrow lane that wound past the churchyard. To shake her pursuer. The lane was quiet, its high hedges casting deep shadows, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth. Her stick tapped softly, masking her alertness. Halfway along, the rustle returned, closer now, accompanied by heavy footsteps. Miss Marple quickened her pace, slipping into a gap in the hedge where an old gate led to the vicarage garden. She crouched behind a yew, her shawl blending with the foliage, and waited, her breath shallow. The figure emerged, a stocky man in a rough jacket, his cap pulled low, his gait matching the accomplice she'd seen with Carver at the Knoll. Not Jem Carter, whose ruddy face she knew, but another, his face obscured but his jacket missing. A brass button like the one in her desk. He paused, scanning the lane, a glint of metal in his hand, a knife, its blade catching the fading light. Miss Marple's heart raced, but she remained still, her mind cataloguing his features: broad shoulders, scuffed boots, a scar on his left hand. He muttered, his voice low, "Where's the old bat gone?" Before turning back, his footsteps fading miss, Marple emerged, her pulse steady, but her resolve hardened. The man's pursuit confirmed her inquiries were rattling the conspirators. She hurried to the vicarage where Mr. Clement was tending roses, his kindly face a welcome sight. Framing her visit as a check on the tea party's proceeds, she slipped. "And a question about strangers in the village." "Odd you mention it," Mr. Clement said, pruning shears in hand. "Saw a rough-looking chap near the church yesterday, stocky, with a scar on his hand. Asked about you. Miss Marple said he was a cousin, but I didn't believe him. Looked like trouble." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind alight. The scarred man was likely Carver's accomplice, not Jem, suggesting a hired thug from outside the village. Back in the village, she stopped at the post office, where Miss Finch's gossip might clarify the man's identity. Miss Finch, sorting parcels, greeted her with a nod. "Miss Marple, you're about late. Heard anything more about that Knoll business?" Miss Marple smiled, her tone light. "Just curious, Clara. Have you seen a stocky man, scarred hand, perhaps with Robert Carver?" Miss Finch's eyes gleamed. "I saw him with Carver last week, posting a letter to London Blackwood and Sons again. Called himself Ned Stokes, said he was a laborer, but his boots were city-made, too fine for farm work." Miss Marple's heart skipped, but she nodded calmly. Ned Stokes, not Jem Carter, was the J.C. accomplice, his initials a misdirection or coincidence. His pursuit in the lane was a warning, but it had yielded a new clue, a torn scrap of paper, dropped where he'd paused, caught in the hedge. She retrieved it discreetly, noting its scrawl: "Meet R.C. Knoll, midnight." The handwriting matched a coded note tying Stokes to the conspiracy at her cottage. Miss Marple spread the scrap beside her clues, her knitting needles idle. The locket's tale, confirmed by Mary, had led Tom to confront Lady Eleanor, likely sparking his discovery of the land fraud. Stokes's pursuit and the new note confirmed Carver's network was tightening, but his identity as the scarred man was a breakthrough. The blood-stained rag loomed, suggesting Tom's fate, but the locket and Stokes's note kept the mystery alive. She locked the scrap away, her needles clicking as she planned her next move. Stokes's midnight meeting with Carver offered a chance to eavesdrop again, but her safety required caution, perhaps enlisting the vicar's help to watch the Knoll. Lady Eleanor's role needed further probing, and the small key might unlock more manor secrets. For now the shadow in the lane had unveiled a new player in the Hillside Enigma, and Miss Marple's acute logic was poised to unravel its next thread. Chapter 13. The Midnight Meeting. The night cloaked St. Mary Mead in a velvet stillness, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl and the rustle of leaves in the autumn breeze. Miss Jane Marple, her mind as sharp as the moonlight slicing through her cottage window, prepared for a perilous venture. Her desk held a formidable array of clues: the lavender-scented silk scarf, the cigarette case with H.G. initials, the leather glove, the cryptic note, the black ledger, the brass button, the blood-stained rag, the rusted tin's map, the pocket-knife marked J.C., the silver pen engraved with R.C., and the torn scrap of paper reading Meet R.C. Knoll, midnight. The coded note. The 7th of March, 12, RC to L, PM NTFRSLNC, 5000, Oak Dusk, and that Locket's history as a disputed heirloom had tied Tom Briar to the Graysons, while Ned Stokes's pursuit in the lane confirmed his role as Carver's accomplice. The blood-stained rag and vanished box of blackmail letters hinted at a grim fate for Tom, and the midnight meeting noted on the scrap offered a chance to uncover the truth. Tonight, Miss Marple resolved to eavesdrop on Carver and Stokes Briars, no risking discovery to unravel the Hillside Enigma. She dressed in a dark wool coat and a black shawl, her appearance crafted to melt into the shadows. Her handbag held her torch, a notebook, and the small key from the Manor's inkwell, its purpose still elusive but potentially vital. The walk to the knoll was treacherous in the dark, the lane winding through hedgerows thick with thorns, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine. Miss Marple's walking stick tapped softly, her senses alert for any sign of pursuit, her memory of Stokes's knife in the lane sharpening her caution. The knoll loomed ahead, its ancient oak, a gnarled silhouette against the starry sky, the stone circles slabs ghostly in the moonlight. She chose a hiding spot behind a cluster of briars near the old well, her shawl blending with the foliage, her breath steady despite the chill of anticipation. The clock in the village church struck midnight, its chimes faint but clear. A rustle broke the silence, and two figures emerged: Robert Carver, his city coat unmistakable, and Ned Stokes, stocky and scarred, his cap pulled low. They carried a lantern, its dim glow casting eerie shadows on the ruins. Miss Marple crouched lower, her heart pounding, but her mind razor-sharp, as their voices drifted to her, low and tense. "You move the box, Stokes?" Carver hissed, his sharp features taut in the lantern's light. That old woman sniffing. "Too close, Marple. She's been at the Manor, asking about the locket." Stokes spat, his scarred hand gripping a shovel. It's safe, buried deeper in the woods. But you didn't say nothing about a body, Carver. Tom Briar's not just missing, he's dead, ain't he?" Miss Marple's breath caught her, gloved hand tightening on her stick. The blood-stained rag flashed in her mind, its grim portent now confirmed. She strained to hear, her body still as the stones around her. Carver's voice dropped to a growl. "Keep your voice down, you fool. Briar found the deed new. It was forged. He was going to the magistrate, so I dealt with him. The locket was his excuse to poke around, stirring up old grudges." Stokes shifted, his shovel clattering against a stone. "And Grayson? He's getting jumpy. Those letters, we've got his and Lady Eleanor's. They'll keep him quiet. But if Marple finds the body—" Carver cut him off, his hand slashing. "The heir. She won't. We'll move it tonight, to the river. The buyer's waiting in London, Blackwood and Sons. Once the land deal's done, we're clear." Miss Marple's pulse raced, her mind cataloguing every word. Tom's death, the forged deed, the blackmail letters involving both Graysons, and a body hidden on the knoll. It was a devastating revelation. The river as a disposal site was new, and the locket's role as Tom's pretext explained his confrontation with Lady Eleanor. She noted Carver's mention of woods for the box's new hiding place, a lead to pursue. As the men moved toward the ruins, digging near a slab, she glimpsed a heavy sack, its shape ominously human. Her heart sank, but she remained still, her shawl catching on thorns. Carver paused, his lantern sweeping the briars, and Miss Marple froze, her breath held. "Thought I heard something," he muttered, his eyes narrowing. Stokes shrugged, hefting the sack, and they moved off, their footsteps fading toward the river path. Miss Marple waited, her body aching from the crouch, until silence returned. She emerged, her torch sweeping the ground where they'd dug. A glint caught her eye. Small brass key dropped in their haste, its design simpler than the Manor's inkwell key, but similar in size. She pocketed it, suspecting it opened the wooden box of letters. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the brass key beside her clues, her knitting needles idle. The midnight meeting had confirmed Tom's murder, a crushing blow, but it clarified the stakes: a forged deed, blackmailed letters, and a body hidden to protect a land deal. Carver and Stokes were ruthless, and Lady Eleanor's involvement tied to the locket and letters suggested fear or coercion. The new key was a breakthrough, likely unlocking the box now hidden in the woods. She locked it away, her resolve firm. Tomorrow she would alert the constable to search the river, framing it as a villager's tip, and seek the box in the woods using the key. Carver's vigilance required a decoy, perhaps another rumor. For now the midnight meeting had unveiled the heart of the Hillside Enigma, and Miss Marple's acute logic was poised to bring justice. Chapter 14. The unraveled enigma. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a serene glow, its soft light belying the dark truths Miss Jane Marple was poised to unveil. Her cottage, a haven of chintz and quiet resolve, held a formidable array of clues. The lavender-scented silk scarf, the cigarette case with H.G. initials, the leather glove, the cryptic note, the black ledger, the brass button, the blood-stained rag, the rusted tin's map, the pocket-knife marked J.C., the silver pen engraved with R.C., the torn scrap reading, Meet R.C., Knoll, Midnight, and the brass key dropped by Ned Stokes. The coded note, the 7th of March 12, R.C. to L, P.M.N.T. F.R.S.L.N.C. 5000. Oak dusk had revealed a blackmail scheme, while the locket's history tied Tom Briar to the Graysons. The midnight meeting had confirmed Tom's murder, with his body destined for the river and a box of blackmail letters hidden in the woods. Today, Miss Marple resolved to find the box, alert the constable to search the river, and confront the culprits Robert Carver, Ned Stokes, and the Graysons, bringing justice to Tom and unraveling the hillside. Enigma Dot, she dressed in a sturdy gray coat and a hat with a modest veil, her appearance crafted to deflect suspicion. Her handbag held her notebook, the brass key, and the small key from the Manor's inkwell, its purpose still a mystery but possibly linked to the box. The woods near Briar's Knoll, where Stokes had hidden the box, were her first destination. The morning air was crisp, the lane to the knoll lined with hedgerows heavy with frost, the scent of pine and damp earth sharp in her nostrils. Her walking stick tapped a cautious rhythm, her senses alert for Carver's surveillance or Stokes's menace, her memory of his knife in the lane ever present. The woods were a tangle of oak and birch, their branches forming a canopy that dimmed the sunlight. Miss Marple followed a narrow path, guided by Stokes's mention of a deeper hiding place. Her torch swept the ground, revealing disturbed earth near a gnarled tree, its roots forming a natural hollow. She knelt, her trowel probing the soil, and within moments unearthed the wooden box oak, iron-banded, as she'd seen on the knoll. The brass key fit perfectly, its lock clicking open to reveal a bundle of letters, their seals broken, addressed to Sir Henry and Lady Eleanor. She scanned them quickly, her heart racing. Sir Henry's letters confessed to forging the North Ridge deed, fearing ruin, while Lady Eleanor's pleaded for secrecy, admitting she'd given Tom the locket to appease his demands only for him. To uncover the fraud, Miss Marple tucked the letters into her handbag, reburying the box to avoid suspicion. The letters were the key to the blackmail scheme, proof of the Graysons' complicity and Tom's motive for confronting them. She hurried to the constable's office, framing her river search request as a villager's tip about suspicious activity. Constable Barnes, his walrus mustache twitching, agreed to search the riverbank, though his skepticism lingered. "Another hunch, Miss Marple," he grunted. "I'll look, but don't expect miracles." With the constable dispatched, Miss Marple headed to Grayson Manor, her resolve firm. The manor's gates loomed, the gravel drive crunching underfoot. As Elsie ushered her to the drawing-room, Lady Eleanor, pale and drawn, greeted her with a trembling smile, her lavender gown a stark reminder of the scarf. Sir Henry was absent, but Miss Marple noted his coat on a chair, a crumpled telegram peeking from its pocket. She sat, her tone gentle but unyielding. "Lady Eleanor," she began, "I've found letters yours and Sir Henry's detailing a forged deed and Tom Briar's demands about a locket. As murder on the knoll cannot be ignored. Will you tell me the truth, or shall I take this to the magistrate?" Lady Eleanor's face crumpled, tears spilling. "Oh, Miss Marple, I didn't know it would come to this. Tom demanded the locket his family's," he said. "I gave it to him, hoping he'd leave, but he found Henry's papers, the forged deed. Henry panicked, and Carver, he said he'd handle it." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "And Carver killed him, with Ned Stokes's help. Where is Sir Henry now?" Before Lady Eleanor could answer, the door burst open, and Sir Henry stormed in, his face ashen. "What's this about letters, Miss Marple? You've meddled too far." His hand reached for his pocket, but Miss Marple raised her stick, her gaze steady. "Sir Henry," she said, "the letters are with me, and the constable is searching the river for Tom's body. Carver and Stokes are your accomplices, but the truth is out. Confess, and it may go easier." Sir Henry's shoulders sagged, his voice breaking. "It was Carver's idea, the deed, the land deal. Tom found out, threatened to expose us. I didn't want him dead, but Carver, he's ruthless." The drawing-room door opened again, and Constable Barnes entered, his face grim, followed by two officers dragging Robert Carver and Ned Stokes, both handcuffed. "Found the body in the river, Miss Marple," Barnes said, "and these two skulking near the woods. The letters you slipped to my deputy sealed it." Miss Marple nodded, her heart heavy but satisfied. She'd passed the letters to a deputy en route to the manor, ensuring justice. Carver glared, his sharp features defiant, while Stokes slumped, his scar stark in the light. Lady Eleanor sobbed, confessing her fear of Sir Henry's temper. Her spade used to hide evidence at Carver's bidding. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her clues spread before her, now relics of a solved mystery. Tom's murder, driven by a forged deed and a locket's legacy, had unraveled through her acute logic. Sir Henry and Lady Eleanor faced charges as accessories, while Carver and Stokes awaited trial for murder and blackmail. The locket was returned to Mary Briar, a small justice for her brother's loss. Miss Marple locked her clues away, her knitting needles clicking as St. Mary Mead settled into its tranquil rhythm, the Hillside Enigma resolved. Chapter 15. The whispering hills, the morning mist, clung to the slopes of Haverford Hill like a lover reluctant to part. Miss Jane Marple, bundled in her tweed coat and a scarf of soft lavender, stood at the edge of St. Mary Mead's northern boundary, her sharp eyes scanning the undulating landscape. The village below lay quiet, its chimneys puffing lazy curls of smoke, but up here, where the wind sang through gnarled oaks and brambles, something felt amiss. She had been summoned by a cryptic note slipped under her door at dawn, penned in a hurried hand. "Meet me at the old shepherd's cairn, sunrise. The hill hides a secret." Miss Marple's lips pursed as she recalled the note, now tucked safely in her handbag. She didn't know an E in St. Mary Mead, not personally, but her years of observing human nature told her this was no prank. The cairn, a crumbling pile of stones set to mark a forgotten tragedy, loomed ahead, half shrouded in fog. She adjusted her hat and stepped forward, her sensible shoes crunching on frost-kissed grass dot. As she approached, a figure emerged from the mist, a young woman no more than 25 with wild auburn hair and eyes that darted like a cornered hare's. Her coat was too thin for the chill, and her hands twisted nervously around a leather satchel. "You're Miss Marple?" the woman asked, her voice low as if the hill itself might overhear. "I am," Miss Marple replied, her tone warm but probing. "And you must be Eleanor, perhaps?" The woman flinched, then nodded. "Eleanor Vance, I didn't know who else to turn to. They say you see things others miss." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was already at work, cataloguing Eleanor's trembling hands, the faint bruise on her wrist, the satchel clutched like a lifeline. "Tell me, my dear, what brings you to this lonely place so early?" Eleanor glanced over her shoulder, then leaned closer. "It's about the Haverford Trust, the land deal. Someone's going to die if it goes through, Miss Marple." "I know. It sounds mad, but I've seen things, heard things up here on the hill. Whispers, shadows moving where no one should be." Miss Marple's brow furrowed. The Haverford Trust was the talk of the village, a proposal to sell the hill and its surrounding acres to a London developer for a sprawling estate of modern homes. The village was divided. Some saw prosperity, others the ruin of their pastoral haven. But whispers, shadows, that was new. "Start at the beginning, Miss Vance," Miss Marple said, guiding her to a flat stone where they could sit, "and leave nothing out." Eleanor's story poured out in a rush, like water from a cracked dam. She was a junior clerk at the village solicitor's office, handling paperwork for the trust. 3 weeks ago, she'd overheard a heated argument between Mr. Reginald Hawes, the solicitor, and a man she didn't recognize, a man with a London accent and a scar across his left cheek. They spoke of adjusting boundaries and silencing objections. The next day she found a map in Hawes's office, marked with strange symbols near the shepherd's cairn. When she asked about it, Hawes snapped at her to mind her own business. "Then, last week," Eleanor whispered, "I came up here to clear my head. It was dusk, and I saw figures, 3 of them, hooded, moving in a circle around the cairn. They were chanting Miss Marple, low and strange, like nothing I've ever heard. I hid behind that oak. She pointed to a gnarled tree nearby. And when they left, I found this. She opened her satchel and pulled out a small, tarnished silver medallion, etched with a spiral and a single eye at its center dot. Miss Marple took the medallion, turning it over in her gloved hands. It was heavy, old, and faintly warm, as if it had been held too long. "Curious," she murmured. "And you've told no one else?" Eleanor shook her head. "I tried to tell Mr. Hawes, but he laughed it off, said I was imagining things. But yesterday I got this." She produced a folded note from her pocket, its edges crumpled. "Stop poking about, or the hill will claim you too." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "We must tread carefully, my dear. This hill has stories old ones half forgotten, but threats, that's a modern evil. Tell me, who stands to gain from this?" "Land deal?" Eleanor hesitated. "Mr. Hawes, for one. He's handling the contracts, and I've seen his bank statements, large deposits, unmarked. Then there's Mrs. Clara Dunhill, the widow who owns half the hill. She's pushing for the sale, says it'll secure her future. And there's talk of a silent partner, someone from London. No one knows who." Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving threads. Clara Dunhill was a sharp, ambitious woman, widowed young, and known for her ruthless streak at bridge. Reginald Hawes, meanwhile, was all charm and polish, but Miss Marple had long suspected his smile hid sharper edges. A silent partner, that was a knot to untangle. "Let's walk to the cairn," Miss Marple suggested. "Sometimes the past speaks loudest where stones stand silent." The cairn was older than the village itself, its stones weathered by centuries of rain and wind. Local legend claimed it marked the grave of a shepherd who vanished during a storm. In 1743, though some whispered of darker Thales rituals, sacrifices, a hill that watched. Miss Marple circled the pile, her eyes catching on a patch of disturbed earth near the base. She knelt, ignoring the damp seeping through her stockings, and brushed away loose soil. Beneath was a flat stone, etched with the same spiral and eye. Simple as Eleanor's medallion. "Curiouser and curiouser," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but her mind racing. She glanced at Eleanor. "Have you seen this mark elsewhere?" Eleanor shook her head, her face pale. "Only on the medallion. But last night I heard the chanting again. From my window, up on the hill. I didn't dare come up." Miss Marple stood brushing dirt from her gloves. "We need more than whispers and symbols, my dear. We need names, motives, and proof. But first we must ensure your safety. Whoever wrote that note knows you're asking questions." Eleanor's eyes widened. "You think I'm in danger?" "I think," Miss Marple said gently, "that someone wishes you to believe you are. Fear is a powerful leash, but we shall not be tethered." By noon, Miss Marple had returned to her cottage, Eleanor in tow. She brewed tea Earl Grey for clarity, and sat Eleanor at her kitchen table, where a notebook and pen awaited. "Write down everyone you've seen near the solicitor's office." "In the past month," Miss Marple instructed. "Even the most mundane visitor. The devil, as they say, is in the details." While Eleanor scribbled, Miss Marple's mind wandered to the hill's history. She recalled a conversation with old Mr. Giles, the village historian, who'd spoken of a 17th-century sect that once gathered on Haverford Hill. worshippers of the Watcher, a figure tied to the land's ancient roots. They'd left behind trinkets, medallions, carvings before vanishing into obscurity. Could the symbols be a remnant of their rites, or was someone using the past to cloak a modern crime? Eleanor's list was short but telling. Mr. Hawes, Mrs. Dunhill, the scarred Londoner, a nervous farmer named Tom Brackett, who'd argued about land boundaries, and a quiet woman in a gray shawl who'd visited Hawes late at night. Miss Marple tapped the last name. This woman described her. Eleanor frowned. Middle-aged, maybe 40, pale, with dark eyes. She didn't speak much, just handed Hawes an envelope and left. I thought she was a courier. Miss Marple's. Lips twitched, or perhaps something more, we shall see. That afternoon, Miss Marple paid a visit to Clara Dunhill's grand house at the village's edge. Clara, resplendent in a silk dress the color of claret, greeted her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Miss Marple, what a delight. To what do I owe this visit? Oh, just a neighborly call, Miss Marple said, settling into a plush armchair. Though I've heard whispers about the Haverford Trust. Quite the venture, selling the hill. Clara's smile tightened. It's progress, Jane. The village could use to fund new roads, a proper school. Surely you see the sense in it? Sense, yes, Miss Marple said, her tone mild. But hills have long memories. I wonder, have you noticed anything unusual up there? Odd visitors, perhaps? Clara's hand paused on her teacup. Unusual? No, nothing but ramblers and sheep. Why do you ask? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Oh, just an old woman's curiosity. But do be careful, my dear. Land deals stir passions, and passions can turn dangerous. As she left, Miss Marple noted the flicker of unease in Clara's posture. The widow was hiding something, perhaps not guilt, but knowledge. Back at her cottage she found Eleanor pacing. I remembered something, Eleanor blurted. The woman in the gray shawl, she dropped a card outside the office. It had a name, Lydia Crane. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. Lydia Crane was no stranger. She'd lived in St. Mary Mead years ago, a quiet spinster with a knack for herbal lore. She'd left abruptly after a scandal involving missing church funds. Could she be the silent partner, or something else? That evening, Miss Marple and Eleanor ventured to the hill under the cover of dusk. Armed with a flashlight and her trusty knitting bag, which held more than needles, Miss Marple led the way to the cairn. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. As they neared the stones, a low hum drifted through the mist, rhythmic, almost musical. Eleanor froze, but Miss Marple pressed a finger to her lips and crept forward. Hidden behind a boulder, they saw them, 3 figures, cloaked and hooded, circling the cairn. Their chant was unintelligible, but the medallions glinting at their necks bore the spiral and eye. Miss Marple's heart quickened, not from fear, but from the thrill of a puzzle nearing its solution. She whispered to Eleanor, "Stay here. Watch." Slipping through the shadows, Miss Marple approached the figures, her steps silent. As she neared, one turned a woman, her face pale under the hood. Lydia Crane. Her eyes widened, but before she could speak, a shout rang out from the trees. "Stop!" It was Tom Brackett, the farmer, his face red with fury. He brandished a shovel, his voice shaking. "You lot think you can scare us off with your nonsense? This hill's mine by rights." The cloaked figures scattered, but Lydia stood her ground. her voice cold. "You're a fool, Brackett. The watcher sees all." Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Enough of this. Lydia Crane, I believe we have matters to discuss." The confrontation unraveled the enigma piece by piece. Lydia, it turned out, had returned to St. Mary Mead under an assumed name, bankrolled by a London investor, the Scarred Man, one Victor Klein. Klein had discovered the Hills' geological secret, a vein of rare minerals, valuable enough to make the land deal a fortune. Lydia, with her knowledge of local lore, had crafted the Watcher myth to scare off nosy villagers, using the old sex symbols to lend authenticity. The cloaked figures were hired hands, paid to stage eerie rituals, but the plan had cracks. Tom Brackett, whose family had grazed sheep on the hill for generations, had stumbled on Klein's surveyors and grown suspicious. Clara Dunhill, desperate for money, had agreed to sell her share but hadn't known about the minerals, only that Klein's payments were generous. Reginald Hawes, meanwhile, was Klein's man in the village, falsifying documents to obscure the mineral rights. The threat to Eleanor had come from Hawes, who'd noticed her snooping. But the real danger lay with Klein, who'd arrived in St. Mary Mead that night, intent on silencing loose ends. Miss Marple, anticipating trouble, had alerted Inspector Craddock, who arrived with constables just as Klein emerged from the trees. A knife glinting in his hand died in the days that followed. The village buzzed with the scandal. Klein and Hawes were arrested. Lydia vanished into the night, and Clara Dunhill, chastened, withdrew her support for the trust. The hill remained untouched, its secrets safe for now. Eleanor, shaken but grateful, took to visiting Miss Marple for tea, her courage bolstered by the old woman's quiet strength. As Miss Marple sat by her fire, knitting a scarf for Eleanor, she smiled to herself. The hill had whispered yes, but it was human nature, greed, fear, ambition, that had spoken loudest. And Jane Marple, with her acute logic and keen eye, had heard it all. Chapter 16. The echoes of Ashwood Manor. The late summer sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting a golden glow across the village's thatched roofs and tidy gardens. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlor, her knitting needles clicking softly, as she worked on a delicate shawl of pale rose. The events on Haverford Hill still lingered in the village's gossip, but Miss Marple's thoughts had already turned to a new puzzle. A letter, delivered that morning by the postman, lay open on her tea-table. Its elegant script bore an invitation and a hint of unease. "Dear Miss Marple, I hope this finds you well. I am hosting a small gathering at Ashwood Manor this weekend to settle matters concerning my late husband's estate. Your reputation for discernment precedes you, and I would be grateful for your presence. I fear all is not as it seems among my guests. Discretion, as ever, is paramount. Yours sincerely, Isabel Langley." Miss Marple's lips pursed as she reread the letter. Ashwood Manor, a sprawling Georgian estate on the outskirts of St. Mary Mead, had stood empty since Sir Henry Langley's death 6 months prior. Isabel, his young widow, had kept to herself, her grief or perhaps her secrets shrouding her like a veil. The invitation was intriguing, but it was the word fear that caught Miss Marple's eye. Fear in her experience was rarely unfounded. She set her knitting aside and rose, her sensible shoes tapping lightly on the polished floor. A weekend at Ashwood Manor promised answers, and Miss Marple was never one to ignore a call for clarity. By Saturday morning, Miss Marple stood at the manor's wrought iron gates, her small suitcase in hand. The estate was a vision of faded grandeur. Ivy clung to honey-colored stone, and the vast lawns stretched toward a distant copse of ash trees, their leaves rustling in the breeze. A butler, stern-faced and impeccably dressed, greeted her and led her through a cavernous hall adorned with portraits of stern Langley's past. Their eyes seemed to follow her, as if guarding secrets of their own. Isabel Langley awaited in the drawing-room, a vision in black silk, her auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon. She was younger than Miss Marple had expected, barely 30, with eyes that held both warmth and wariness. "Miss Marple, thank you for coming," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I hope the journey wasn't too taxing." "Not at all, my dear," Miss Marple replied, settling into a velvet armchair. "Your home is lovely, though it must feel rather large for one." Isabel's smile faltered. "It does. Henry loved this place, but I find it heavy at times, especially now with the estate in dispute." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her expression remained gentle. "Dispute?" Before Isabel could elaborate, the door swung open, and the other guests filtered in. First was Victor Langley, Henry's younger brother, a broad-shouldered man with a booming laugh and a glint of calculation in his eyes. Next came Sylvia Harrow, Henry's cousin, a sharp-tongued woman in her 40s, whose emerald necklace gleamed with ostentatious pride. Then there was Dr. Julian Finch, the family physician, a wiry man with nervous hands and a habit of adjusting his spectacles. Finally, a late-comer slipped in Marcus Tate, a solicitor from London, his sleek suit and guarded smile marking him as an outsider. Isabel introduced Miss Marple as an old family friend, a tactful fiction that raised no eyebrows. As tea was served, Miss Marple observed her companions, her mind cataloguing their glances, their postures, the unspoken tensions that hung like cobwebs in the air. Victor dominated the conversation, regaling them with tales of his travels, but his eyes darted to Isabel whenever she spoke. Sylvia's barbed comments about the manor's upkeep drew a flush to Isabel's cheeks, while Dr. Finch fidgeted, his teacup rattling in its saucer. Marcus Tate, meanwhile, said little, his pen scratching notes in a leather-bound book. "Tell me, Mrs. Langley," Miss Marple said during a lull, "what brings such a varied group together?" Isabel hesitated, her fingers tightening around her cup. "Henry's will. It's complicated. There are provisions that need settling, and not everyone agrees on their interpretation." Victor snorted. "That's putting it mildly. Henry tied up half the estate in trusts and riddles. Typical of him, always playing games." Sylvia's lips curled. "Games that favor some more than others, it seems." Dr. Finch cleared his throat. Now, let's not air grievances so soon. Isabel's doing her best." Marcus Tate looked up from his notes. "Indeed? My role is to ensure clarity. The will's terms are unusual, but not insoluble." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Unusual, you say? How intriguing." Isabel rose, smoothing her dress. "Perhaps we should adjourn until dinner. Miss Marple, may I show you to your room?" The guest room was a study in opulence, a four-poster bed draped in damask, a fireplace crackling softly, and windows overlooking the ash grove. As Isabel lingered, Miss Marple seized a moment. "My dear, your letter mentioned fear. What troubles you?" Isabel glanced at the door, then lowered her voice. It's the will, Miss Marple. Henry left a codicil, a secret clause revealed only after his death. It names a beneficiary none of us expected, someone outside the family. Victor and Sylvia are furious, and I've heard them whispering about contesting it. But there's more. Last week I found a letter in Henry's study, hidden in a book. It hinted at danger. He wrote that someone close to him couldn't be trusted. Miss Marple's brow furrowed. Do you have this letter? Isabel shook her head. It's gone. I left it on the desk, and the next day it was missing. I've felt watched ever since, shadows in the corridors, footsteps at night. Miss Marple patted her hand. We shall get to the bottom of this, my dear. But tell me, who is this unexpected beneficiary? Isabel's lips parted, but a knock at the door interrupted. The butler announced dinner, and the moment passed. Dinner was a tense affair, served in a dining room lit by a chandelier that cast flickering shadows on the walls. The conversation turned to Henry's eccentricities, his love of puzzles, his collection of rare books, his habit of hiding notes in unexpected places. Miss Marple listened, her mind turning over Isabel's words. A secret beneficiary, a missing letter, a sense of being watched. It was a tapestry of intrigue, and she suspected the threads led back to the will. As dessert was served, Sylvia leaned forward, her voice dripping with venom. Isabel, when will you stop playing coy? Who's this mystery heir Henry fancied so much? Victor slammed his glass down. Yes, let's have it out. I've half a mind to think you're behind. It, Isabel. Cooking up some scheme to keep the estate for yourself. Isabel paled. That's absurd. I didn't even know about the codicil until Marcus read it. Marcus adjusted his tie. The codicil is clear, though its beneficiary's identity is sensitive. I'll disclose it tomorrow, once I've verified certain details. Dr. Finch mopped his brow. Can't we settle this civilly? Henry wouldn't want us at each other's throats. Miss Marple sipped her wine, her eyes darting between them. Victor's anger seemed genuine, but was it fueled by greed or betrayal? Sylvia's malice suggested a deeper grudge. Finch's nerves hinted at guilt or fear. And Marcus, with his smooth assurances, was too polished, too controlled. After dinner, Miss Marple excused herself, claiming a need for fresh air. Instead, she slipped into the library, a vast room lined with leather-bound volumes and dominated by a portrait of Sir Henry, his eyes stern, yet twinkling. She recalled Isabel's mention of a hidden letter and began searching, her fingers trailing along the shelves. In a copy of The Hound of the Baskervilles, she found a folded paper, not the letter Isabel described, but a map, hand-drawn, marking a spot in the ash grove labeled The Hollow. Her pulse quickened. Before she could pocket the map, a creak sounded behind her. She turned to find Dr. Finch, his face pale. Miss Marple, I didn't expect anyone here. Nor I, she said, her tone light. I was admiring the collection. Sir Henry was quite the bibliophile, wasn't he? Finch nodded, his hands twisting. Yes, he loved his books. I should retire. Good night. As he left, Miss Marple tucked the map into her handbag. The Hollow, whatever it was, warranted investigation. That night a storm rolled in, thunder rattling the manor's windows. Miss Marple, unable to sleep, sat by her fire, knitting and thinking. The map suggested Henry had hidden something in the grove, perhaps evidence of the danger he'd feared. But who had taken Isabel's letter? And why was Finch so rattled? At 2 a.m. a scream pierced the silence. Miss Marple donned her robe and hurried into the corridor, where Isabel stood, trembling, her nightgown clutched tightly. It was. "In my room," she gasped, "a snake on my bed." The household gathered, bleary-eyed and tense. Victor fetched a poker and dispatched the creature, a harmless grass snake, but its presence was no accident. "Someone's playing tricks," he growled, glaring at Sylvia. "Don't look at me," she snapped. "I'm not the one with a motive to scare Isabel witless." Marcus, calm as ever, suggested calling the police, but Isabel demurred. "It's just a prank. Let's not make a fuss." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. A prank, perhaps, but one meant to unsettle. She resolved to visit the ash grove at dawn. The grove was a tangle of ancient trees, their branches knitting a canopy that dimmed the morning light. Miss Marple, armed with a map and a sturdy umbrella, navigated the undergrowth until she found the hollow, a shallow depression, ringed by stones, half hidden by ferns. At its center was a flat slab etched with a single word, Veritas. Kneeling, she brushed away moss and found a metal box buried beneath. Inside was a journal, its pages filled with Henry's precise script. Miss Marple skimmed, her heart racing. The journal detailed Henry's discovery of a fraud. Victor had been siphoning funds from the estate, with Sylvia's complicity. Henry had confronted them, threatening to disinherit them both. The codicil, he wrote, named a local charity as his heir, a final act of defiance against his greedy kin. But the last entry chilled her. "I suspect Julian knows more than he lets on. His prescriptions have changed too strong, too frequent. I fear my time is short. Miss Marple closed the journal, her mind racing. Dr. Finch, the nervous physician, had access to Henry's medications. Had he been coerced or, worse, complicit in Henry's death? Back at the manor, Miss Marple sought out Isabel, who was pale but composed. "My dear," Miss Marple said, "we must speak plainly. Henry's journal suggests he was poisoned. Do you trust Dr. Finch?" Isabel's eyes widened. "Poisoned? Julian, he's been kind, but Henry did seem weaker in his final weeks. I thought it was his heart." Miss Marple nodded. "We need proof. But first, we must ensure your safety. Someone here is desperate to keep secrets buried." That afternoon, Marcus called the guests to the drawing-room to reveal the codicil's beneficiary. As he spoke, Miss Marple watched the others. Victor's fists clenched. Sylvia's lips thinned. Finch's hands shook. When Marcus named the charity, Victor exploded. "A charity? That's madness. Isabel, you must have known." "I didn't," Isabel said, her voice firm. "But I'll honor Henry's wishes." Sylvia laughed, a brittle sound. "Honor? You'll be out on the street, girl, once we contest this." Miss Marple cleared her throat. "Before we speak of contests, perhaps Dr. Finch could clarify something. Sir Henry's journal mentions unusual prescriptions. Care to explain, Doctor?" Finch's face drained of color. I followed standard protocols. Henry was ill. Ill or made so?" Miss Marple pressed, her voice soft but unyielding. "I've sent a sample of his medication to a friend at Scotland Yard. Shall we await the results?" Finch crumpled, his glasses slipping. "It was Victor," he whispered. "He threatened me, said he'd ruin me if I didn't." Adjust the doses. I didn't know it would kill him. Victor lunged, but Marcus and the butler restrained him. Sylvia, pale, stammered denials, but her complicity was clear. Isabel, tears streaming, clutched Miss Marple's hand. "How did you know?" Miss Marple smiled gently. "People, my dear, are much like knitting. Pull one thread and the pattern unravels." By evening, Inspector Craddock had arrived, taking Victor and Finch into custody. Sylvia, implicated but not charged, fled to London, her pride shattered. The charity inherited the estate, and Isabel, freed from its burdens, planned to start anew. Miss Marple, suitcase in hand, declined a ride to the station, preferring the walk through St. Mary Mead's quiet lanes. As she passed the ash grove, she paused, the journal safe in her bag. Ashwood Manor's echoes had faded, but human nature, with its tangle of greed and guilt, would always whisper new riddles, and Jane Marple, with her acute logic, would always listen. Chapter 17. The shadow of the clock towards autumn wind carried a crisp bite through St. Mary Mead, rattling the shutters of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, and scattering leaves across her garden path. Inside she sat by her fire, a cup of chamomile, tea steaming gently, her knitting needles crafting a scarf in soft gray wool. The village had settled after the scandals of Haverford Hill and Ashwood Manor, but Miss Marple knew better than to trust such lulls. Human nature, like the seasons, was ever-changing, and trouble had a way of blooming when least expected. That morning, a curious parcel had arrived, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. It contained a single item, an old brass key, its teeth worn but intricate, accompanied by a note in spidery handwriting. "The clock tower holds the truth. Find it before the chime of midnight, or the past will claim another. A friend." No signature, no return address, only the faint scent of lavender clinging to the paper dot. Miss Marple turned the key over in her gloved hands, her sharp eyes tracing its curves. The clock tower, a relic of St. Mary Mead's medieval past, stood at the village square, its weathered stone face looming over market stalls and cobblestones. Its clock had been silent for decades, stopped at 10 minutes to midnight after a fire in 1897. Locals called it the Silent Sentinel, weaving tales of lost treasures and ghostly chimes. But a key? That was new. She tucked the key into her handbag and rose, her mind already threading possibilities. A friend, the note claimed, but friends didn't hide behind anonymity. This was a summons, and Miss Marple was not one to ignore. A mystery's call. By noon, Miss Marple stood beneath the clock tower, her scarf fluttering in the breeze. The structure was imposing, its arched door boarded shut, its narrow windows dark with grime. A small crowd bustled nearby market day, brought farmers, bakers, and gossip, but no one paid the tower mind. She circled it, noting the faint scratches around the door's lock, as if someone had recently forced entry. The key felt heavy in her pocket, but she hesitated. Daylight was no time for secrets. She needed allies. Her first stop was the vicarage, where Reverend Clement, a kindly man with a penchant for local history, welcomed her with tea and scones. "Miss Marple, what brings you out on such a blustery day?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. "Behind spectacles. Double quotes. Oh, just a fancy to learn more about our clock tower," she said, her tone light. "It's such a curious old thing. Do you know its history?" The vicar's face lit up. indeed. Built in 1420, funded by Lord Edmund Carey, a rather eccentric fellow. He was obsessed with time clocks, sundials, even astrolabes. Legend says he hid a fortune in the tower before his death, though no one's found it. The fire of '97 gutted the upper levels, but the structure held. Pity about the clock never repaired. Miss Marple sipped her tea. A fortune, you say? And no one searched since? Oh, treasure hunters tried in the early days, but the tower's locked tight. The parish council holds the only key, or so they claim. He frowned. Though I heard odd noises last month, like footsteps above the square. I thought it was my imagination. Miss Marple's lips twitched. Footsteps are rarely imagined, Reverend. Tell me, who oversees the tower now? That would be Mr. Percival Grayson, the council chairman, a stickler for rules, but a good sort. Lives at Ivy Cottage, near the mill. Thanking him, Miss Marple left, her mind buzzing. Footsteps in a locked tower, a mysterious key, a cryptic note. Someone was stirring the past, and she suspected it wasn't for treasure alone. At Ivy Cottage, Percival Grayson greeted her with polite reserve. A wiry man in his 60s, with a neatly trimmed mustache and a fondness for tweed, he ushered her into a cluttered study lined with ledgers. Miss Marple, to what do I owe the pleasure? He asked, adjusting a stack of papers. I've been pondering the clock tower, she said, settling into a chair. Such a landmark, yet so neglected. I understand you hold its key? Grayson's hand paused mid-motion. The key? Yes, it's in the council's safe. Why do you ask? Oh, just an old woman's curiosity, she said, her eyes meeting his, though I've heard rumors of activity there. Lights at night, perhaps? Grayson's mustache twitched. Nonsense. The tower's sealed. Vandals, maybe, but we'd know if anyone got inside. His voice was firm, but his fingers tapped nervously on the desk. Miss Marple smiled. Of course, but if you'd indulge me, might I see the council's key? For peace of mind? Grayson hesitated, then rose. Very well, it's no secret. He opened a small safe and produced a brass key similar to hers, but shinier, less worn. Satisfied? Quite, she said, though her mind noted the difference. 2 keys, one old, one new. Curiouser and curiouser. As she left, she caught a glimpse of a photograph on Grayson's mantel. A young woman, laughing, with auburn hair and striking green eyes. Your daughter? She asked. Grayson's face softened. My niece, Nora. She passed 3 years ago. A car accident. His voice tightened, and he turned away. Miss Marple murmured condolences, but her thoughts lingered on Nora. A tragedy, yes, but why did Grayson's grief feel so raw? That afternoon, Miss Marple visited the village library, where Miss Hartnell, the librarian, was cataloguing books with her usual brisk efficiency. Miss Marple, you're looking purposeful, she said, peering over her glasses. What's on your mind? The clock tower, Miss Marple replied, scanning the shelves. Any records on it? Old deeds, perhaps, or tales of Lord Carey? Miss Hartnell's eyes gleamed. Plenty. Come with me. She led Miss Marple to a dusty archive room where yellowed documents lay in neat stacks. After an hour's search, they unearthed a journal from 1896, penned by a caretaker named Amos Wren. Its final entry dated the night of the fire. Read, the tower's secret is safe, but at what cost? I saw her tonight. cloaked, at the door. She knows too much. God forgive me. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Her, she murmured. Who was Amos Wren? Miss Hartnell shrugged. A local, long dead. The fire killed him trapped in the tower, poor soul. Some say he started it to hide something. Thanking her, Miss Marple borrowed the journal and headed home, the keys weight a constant reminder in her bag. At dusk she received an unexpected visitor, Eleanor Vance, the young clerk from the Haverford Hill affair, now more confident but still wide-eyed. Miss Marple, I heard you're asking about the clock tower, Eleanor said, twisting her scarf. I saw something last night. A figure near the door, holding a lantern. I was walking home from choir practice and hid behind the butcher's stall. They tried the lock, then left. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. A man or a woman? I couldn't tell. They wore a long coat, hooded. But they dropped this. Eleanor held out a small silver locket. Engraved with the initials N.G. Miss Marple opened it, revealing a faded photograph of the same auburn-haired woman from Grayson's mantel. Nora Grayson, she said softly. Curious indeed. Eleanor bit her lip. Should we tell the police? Not yet, Miss Marple said. But stay close, my dear. I may need your eyes again. That night, under a moon veiled by clouds, Miss Marple and Eleanor approached the clock tower. The key fit the lock with a satisfying click, and the door creaked open, revealing a spiral staircase cloaked in shadow. Armed with a flashlight and her umbrella, Miss Marple led the way, her steps cautious on the worn stone. The air was thick with dust and the faint tang of charred wood. A ghost of the fire long past Dot at the first landing, they found a small chamber, its walls etched with strange symbols, circles within circles, like gears. A wooden chest, locked, sat in the corner. Miss Marple tried the key, but it didn't fit. We'll return to this, she murmured, noting the fresh footprints in the dust. Higher they climbed, until they reached the clock chamber, where massive gears loomed frozen. Mid-turn. The clock face, visible through a cracked window, glowed faintly under moonlight. On a table lay a bundle of letters tied with ribbon and a single candle, recently burned. Miss Marple untied the letters, her eyes scanning the first. Dated 1897, it was addressed to Amos Wren from a woman named Eliza Carey. A descendant of Lord Edmund Amos, you must destroy it. The relic is cursed, tied to the tower's heart. If she finds it, all is lost. See, relic? Eleanor whispered. What relic? Before Miss Marple could answer, a shadow moved behind them. She spun, flashlight catching a figure in a hooded coat. Show yourself, she said, her voice firm. The figure stepped forward, lowering the hood. It was Percival Grayson, his face pale, his eyes wild. Miss Marple, you shouldn't be here, he said, his voice shaking. This place is dangerous. So I gather, she said, holding up the letters. Care to explain, Mr. Grayson? Or shall we discuss Nora's locket? Grayson's shoulders sagged. Nora? She was obsessed with the tower. She found Amos's journal, read about the relic, a gem hidden by Lord Carey, said to grant visions of the future. She thought it was real, wanted to find it. The night she died, she was here, searching. I think someone followed her. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Who? Grayson hesitated. I don't know, but last week I found her locket near the door. I thought maybe she left a clue. Eleanor gasped, but Miss Marple remained calm. "And the note you sent me? The key?" Grayson frowned. "I sent no note. The council's key is still in the safe." Miss Marple's mind raced. If Grayson hadn't sent the key, who had? Before she could press him, a low groan echoed through the tower, followed by the unmistakable sound of stone shifting. Dust rained from above, and Eleanor grabbed Miss Marple's arm. What was that? "The past, perhaps," Miss Marple said, her voice steady. Quickly downstairs. They descended to the chest chamber, where the symbols now glowed faintly, as if activated. The chest's lock clicked open without a key, revealing a velvet pouch. Inside was a gem deep blue, faceted like a star, pulsing with an eerie light. Miss Marple wrapped it carefully in her handkerchief, but as she did, footsteps sounded on the stairs. A woman emerged, cloaked, her face half hidden. "Give it to me," she said, her voice low, holding a small pistol. Miss Marple recognized her at once. Clara Dunhill, the widow from the Haverford affair, her eyes burning with desperation. "Mrs. Dunhill," Miss Marple said, unfazed. "I thought you'd left St. Mary Mead." Clara's laugh was bitter. "I tried, but Nora owed me money, secrets. She promised me the gem, said it would make me rich. When she died, I thought it was lost, until I saw you sniffing around." Grayson stepped forward. "You killed her, didn't you?" Clara's hand shook. It was an accident. She fell, hit her head. "I didn't mean," Miss Marple raised a hand. "Enough, Clara. The gem is no treasure. It's a lure, drawing greed like moths to flame. Hand over the gun." For a moment Clara wavered. Then, with a sob, she dropped the pistol. Eleanor scooped it up, and Grayson bound Clara's hands with his scarf. As they led her down, the tower groaned again, and Miss Marple glanced back. "We must hurry," she said. Outside, Inspector Craddock awaited, alerted by Eleanor's quick thinking and a phone call from the vicarage. Clara was taken into custody, confessing to Nora's death and her scheme to claim the gem. The relic, deemed too dangerous, was entrusted to the vicar for safekeeping. Its origins left to Miss Dot back at her cottage. Miss Marple sipped tea with Eleanor, the key on her table. "Who sent it, do you think?" Eleanor asked. Miss Marple smiled. "A friend, perhaps, or the tower itself, whispering its truths." As she knitted, the wind howled, and somewhere the silent sentinel stood watch, its secrets safe for now.